Chapter 877. There is often no need to speak too clearly in a conversation between smart people, because they could all understand the very subtle hints and the subtext revealed in each other's actions and expressions. Andre, who had 23 points of intelligence, was undoubtedly one of the smart people. He knew that the half-elf archmage in front of him would never lie to him, nor did he have the guts to do so. After all, there was an even more terrifying legendary lich above. If the other party really wanted to break the promise, he could definitely reveal this secret. By then, no matter how greedy Orlando was, he would not dare to disobey his powerful mentor. After thinking about this, Andre opened his palm and handed over the 2 runestones. Here, take them to the basement of the guild headquarters and find a secret room sealed by iron gates. You can use the runestones to control the puppets to open the door. The place I just mentioned is at the end of the secret room. Shield Guardians mass-produced in the Kingdom of Gorls? Why would you buy such rubbish? The half-elf archmage immediately recognized the use of the runestones. He raised his eyebrows and exclaimed as if he was looking at an idiot. No, please don't misunderstand. They were snatched from others. I'm not stupid enough to buy golems made by others, Andre hurriedly explained. He didn't want to be labeled as a retard or an idiot. After all, for a mage above the 9th tier, buying a magic puppet from a fellow mage was a sign that their brains had been crushed. This was because it was equivalent to placing a ticking time bomb beside them. Once something unpleasant happened between the 2 of them, the purchased magic puppet would very likely betray them. Orlando nodded in realization. Oh, I understand now. It must be those guild leaders who secretly smuggled it back from the outside without telling everyone. I can't believe they actually thought of spending such a huge price to buy 2 meaningless rubbish. Andre shrugged non-committally. Maybe. Who knows where they got the shield guardians? Anyway, they're already a bunch of dead people. I'm only concerned about when do you plan to start the exploration? I estimate that it will take at least a week. I have to finish the summoning ritual first. Now is the most crucial time, so I don't dare to relax. As he spoke, the half-elf turned around and glanced at the evil red light at the end of the sewer. As a great mage who had lived for countless years, he had long trained himself to be extraordinarily patient. He did not immediately rush to check out the specific address. Instead, he focused on solving the current problem first, especially since this summoning involved an old enemy of his. Therefore, he could not afford to make any mistakes. Of course, Andre was also not in a hurry because he had more troubles at hand, such as dealing with the returning pirate fleet, restoring order in the city, and making the bleak maritime trade flourish again, and so on. He immediately nodded in agreement. No problem. Let me know when you have the time. I'm also looking forward to seeing what secrets are hidden in the fog. No problem. That's your right and freedom. In addition, I think it's better for us to exchange secret imprints so that it's more convenient for us to contact each other in the future. After all, to some extent, you and I are already allies in the same camp, aren't we? Orlando smiled and winked. He raised his hand and snapped his fingers. In an instant, a dragon-shaped creature drilled out of his waist and opened its mouth to spit out a burning red flame. The shape of the flame was so strange that it was like an enlarged version of a spell model. It was filled with a large number of extremely complex structures. Ordinary people would feel dizzy just by looking at it. With his superior intelligence, Andre took a full 5 minutes to barely record the flame in his mind. Then, he stretched out a finger and released his own secret imprint. A slightly opened eye appeared. On the other hand, the half-elf effortlessly engraved the entire secret imprint in the depths of his memory in just a dozen seconds. He then laughed and teased. My dear friend, don't you think your secret imprint is too conspicuous? I personally suggest that you design a new one. Otherwise, it won't be long before people start suspecting you. Don't underestimate the methods of the churches of gods. Although the divine system is not as powerful as arcane spells, it's more than enough to deal with you now. Believe me, if you don't want to be pestered by those charlatans, the best way is to erase everything that may have a connection with the arcane eye including the giant warship docked at the port. Don't worry. Before returning to Linton City, I'll erase all traces of it completely. Moreover, you can't blame me for using these patterns related to the arcane eye. It's the left eye's influence on the subconscious. Having said that, Andre raised his arm and gently pressed it on the eye mask, feeling the terrifying power coming from it. He knew very well that this eye had always wanted to say something to him, but had never been able to express it clearly. Orlando stroked the dragon-shaped creature lying in his palm and silently watched Andre, who was deep in thought. After a while, he explained, "It seems that the mentor was right. With your current ability, you're not able to control a powerful artifact like the arcane eye. Once everything in the south is settled, I think you should return to the north as soon as possible to pursue that prophecy." "Prophecy? You mean the legend about the son of winter?" Andre asked with a frown. Chapter 878. Someone once said that fate wasn't a fortuitous encounter, but an accumulation of choices. In a long life, everyone would face various choices, and these choices were like droplets of water that converged together to form a long river of fate. This also meant that everyone's fate was actually in their own hands. It was just that most people didn't realize this and would often casually make completely wrong choices in life, then complain all day about the unfairness of fate and use the rest of their lives to pay for these choices. However, Andre clearly didn't belong to this group of people. He was very clear about the choices he'd made from the beginning and understood where his future path lay. At the same time, he didn't like to complain endlessly, because in his eyes, the essence of complaining came from the cowardice of one's character. Only a complete failure would constantly complain about this and that, never thinking about how to change themselves or their fate. After reaching an agreement with the half-elf great wizard Orlando, Andre didn't pay any attention to the ongoing search and purge in the city and quickly returned to the castle at the highest point. After all, following the fall of the underground guilds, many of the groups and individuals that had stepped on their corpses had a trace of apprehension in their hearts. They were afraid that this colossus would revive again and launch a fierce retaliation against them and their families. Therefore, even if no one gave the order, they would still do their best to eliminate such a possibility. Fortunately, there were still the legs of the shadow web to restrain them. Otherwise, a large-scale panic and chaos would have erupted long ago. Murder, robbery, rape, arson, and so on would have spread to every corner. Of course, they weren't that strong right now. At least 100 unlucky people who were identified as members of the guilds were directly beaten to death, while others were cruelly murdered and their corpses thrown on the roofs for the crows and seabirds to peck at. The dark side of human nature was infinitely magnified at this moment. In order to clear themselves of suspicion, countless residents were reporting on each other. As for how many of them were true and how many were false, there was no way to know. In reality, the initiators of this operation didn't really plan on digging up any important figures. They only hoped to use this bloody purge to let everyone in the city understand that the guilds were completely a thing of the past, a part of history. At the same time, they also wanted to warn those ambitious fellows that the turmoil was over and that it was best for them to behave. Old George stood at the top of the castle tower and looked down at everything that was happening in Valen City. He said to his allies behind him in an extremely arrogant tone, "Look, how primitive, how barbaric. This was the result of losing order. Without the guidance of the nobles, the commoners and slaves have no idea how to manage a city." I quite agree with you, Count. Just as described in the teachings of the goddess of aristocracy Ophelia, it is the will of the entire world for the nobles to rule over the commoners. Those who do not obey us are all heretics and should be tied to the stake and burned alive. Another noble echoed loudly. There is no doubt that this was a typical conservative. Perhaps in his mind, every breath of air that the commoners breathed should belong to the nobles. No matter what decision he made, the commoners had to obey him unconditionally. Otherwise, they would be considered traitors and deserve to die. It had to be said that this logic was quite asshole. Not only did they enjoy the fruits of the labor of others with a clear conscience, but they also deprived the civilians of the right to pursue freedom. However, this kind of bastard logic was very popular on the continent. Almost 80% of the ruling class believed in it. Even the ordinary people and serfs in the exploited class felt that it was right and proper for the nobles to inform them. Why was the god of tyranny able to go against so many powerful good gods? The root of this was that there were too many lords in the material world who believed in him. His influence far exceeded that of the god of justice and law. Another noble who was slightly younger had a different opinion. He frowned and pointed at the chaotic streets below. Is it really okay to let them continue like this? You must know that this city now belongs to the entire alliance. We have to fork out money to repair and rebuild every bit of damage. No, you don't have to worry. I believe that Andre will take care of everything. After all, he is the true ruler of Valen City. Haven't you noticed that all the purges have been controlled within a certain range? No one has taken the opportunity to kill or rob, and no one has dared to seize territory. Old George pointed out the crux of the matter. As a veteran noble, he had seen scenes where people had completely lost their minds. Although the situation was chaotic, there were always people who stood out to stop the situation from escalating. Thus, he was very sure that everything was still under Andre's control. All right, your analysis makes sense. I actually don't care about the lives of those lowly commoners at all. I just want to know when Sir Andre will be back. We're all waiting for him to come back and discuss the ambush. Before this noble could finish his words, he saw a young man in a cloak walk in from the main entrance of the castle. He was none other than Andre, who had just come out of the sewers. Seeing this scene, the corners of old George's mouth immediately curled up slightly, revealing a meaningful smile. Looks like our respected leader is back. Let's go down and welcome him together. He must have a perfect plan in his mind. I hope so. You must know that we've already lost more than a quarter of our private army. If they all die, it won't be that easy to replenish them, a noble said with a face full of worry. All right. You can't be too greedy. You have to pay a price for what you want. Compared to the enormous benefits we're about to reap, a few hundred ordinary soldiers are nothing. Remember, keep your thoughts to yourself. Andre doesn't like people playing tricks in private. Not only is he a legitimate noble conferred by the Lincoln City Council, but he's also a powerful mage. Even President Boris has hinted that he might become the next president of the Mage Association. The best way to get along with a powerhouse who's from a different world from us is to be honest, trustworthy, and humble. Only in this way can we benefit from our cooperation and not create a terrifying enemy for ourselves. As the leader of the conservative nobles, Old George was very clear about what kind of people his allies were. Thus, he directly issued a warning in front of everyone. Otherwise, he couldn't guarantee that some of the greedy fellows wouldn't do something stupid. Chapter 879. Ha ha ha. Welcome back, my dear friend. From the expression on your face, I can almost guess that the hunt must have been very successful. Am I right? As soon as he stepped into the hall, Andre saw Old George walking towards him with a big smile and giving him a warm hug. Although the relationship between the two was far from intimate, it gave the onlookers the illusion that they were best friends. As for the others who follow behind, they also came up to say a few polite words to make their presence known so that it would be more convenient for future cooperation. Especially Viscount Igor Warrington, who owned 2 copper mines, a saltpeter mine and a sulfur mine. His attitude could not be described as just being polite. He even hinted that he had a young and beautiful daughter that he could send over to be Andre's mistress. However, Andre politely declined because he did not think that the young and beautiful daughter mentioned by Viscount Igor Warrington would be in line with his own aesthetic standards. It must be known that the southern city-states and even the entire continent had a preference for beautiful women to be slightly plump, which was often said to be plump and fleshy. Don't be fooled by how beautiful they looked when they wore clothes, but once they took off their corsets and long skirts, their bucket-like figures would immediately be revealed. Chloe's slender figure was actually not very popular in the aristocratic circle. If not for her family being prominent enough, she might have been ostracized and ridiculed. The only thing that made Andre feel fortunate was that although the productivity, culture, and economic standards of this world were similar to the dark Middle Ages of Europe, the hygiene habits were still quite good. At the very least, he wasn't like the French king, Louis XIV, who had only bathed twice in his life. It was said that even his mistress, Madame Montez, once wrote in her memoirs that the great Sun King was covered in a stench that could make people vomit from 10 steps away. After a simple chat, old George quickly put away the smile on his face. He carefully took out the manuscript written by Master Swordsman Johannes and a piece of parchment written in the common language from his bosom. He solemnly said, "My name is Johannes. My friend, after 2 hours of intense discussion last night, all the members of the Alliance agreed that the contents of this manuscript must be kept strictly confidential and must not fall into the hands of outsiders. In order to ensure this, we have drafted a confidentiality agreement. The biggest problem now is that we have to get your consent first. Otherwise, all the terms on this paper will be empty talk." Andre glanced at the contents of the parchment and smiled playfully. "Count, based on our understanding of each other, you don't have to beat around the bush. Why don't you just say that I have to sign this agreement as well?" The reason why he said this was very simple. The terms on the parchment were mainly used to restrict the members of the Alliance. They were not allowed to disclose the contents of the manuscript to anyone, including their relatives, children, and friends. Even if they wanted to learn the contents, they had to swear an oath in the name of their family before they could read it in public. This also meant that even if someone learned all the skills recorded in it, there was no way to teach it to others. They could only follow the established rules and send the talented young people in the family to the Sardinia Islands to learn. Of course, the biggest problem was that, as the donor of the manuscript, Andre was not bound by the terms. So for their own interests, the members of the Alliance hoped that he could give a guarantee that he would not copy this manuscript and give it to other people or organizations. Old George was never an idiot. He instantly realized that his behavior seemed to have crossed the bottom line of the young man in front of him. He hurriedly lowered his voice and explained, "No, please don't misunderstand. We don't mean to coerce you. It's just a discussion. After all, as a mage, you may not know how important the contents inside are to close combat professionals. As long as we are willing, we can even attract a large number of warriors and knights to serve the entire Alliance in just a few years with the contents inside. Think about it. This situation will continue for 5 years, 10 years, 50 years, 100 years. How powerful will the Alliance become? And you just so happen to be the one who benefits the most. The biggest beneficiary? Count, you really know how to joke. Do you think I can't see that you are planning to control more high-end forces?" Andre sneered and exposed the other party's conspiracy. He knew better than anyone else the attraction of the noble class to the lower class in the feudal era. Not to mention the feudal era. Even in the 21st century on Earth, when the royal families of some countries were mentioned, there were a large group of so-called free and democratic modern people who would kneel down and fawn, doing their best to imitate their words and actions, thinking that it symbolized nobility and elegance. As for Orire, it was needless to say. If adventurers and mercenaries were to choose an employer between rich merchants and nobles at the same time, most of them would choose nobles and not merchants who could afford more gold coins. The reason was simple. Nobles were the ruling class. Working for them meant that there was a chance to enter the upper class. Although merchants also belonged to the social elite, their nature was like pigs in a pen. Once an accident happened, they would immediately become scapegoats. Not only would they not be able to ensure the safety of their own property, they might even lose the lives of their family members. It was also because of this that countless merchants who had made a fortune desperately wanted to get a noble title, even if it meant giving up half of their property. The conservative nobles led by Old George had the purpose of using the contents of the manuscript. On one hand, it was to improve the combat skills of the family's descendants. On the other hand, it was to continuously attract the wandering warriors and knights. Then, they would use their noble status to absorb a large number of talents. According to the values of this world, it was believed that out of 10 people, at least 8 would rely on them, and the rest would be recruited by the smugglers. In the long run, the power of the nobles would become stronger and stronger, and the power of the merchants would become weaker and weaker. In the end, they might even be pushed out. How could Andre, who had always liked to check and balance power, sit by and watch this happen? His purpose was to build a country where mages ruled over nobles, and not a country where mages were ruled over by nobles. Old George was obviously a little unwilling to give up. He took a deep breath and continued, "All right, I admit that we have some ideas in this regard. But please don't forget that you are also a member of the noble class. Compared to those lowly smugglers, we're the friends that you can really trust and rely on. I don't understand why you keep protecting the smugglers and even share the benefits with them. After all, the ones who came all the way here with the army to support you are not them, but us." Chapter 880. In the face of old George's questioning, Andre did not even blink. Instead, the corners of his mouth rose slightly, revealing a meaningful smile. "Do you really want to know why I let those smugglers join the alliance? Or do you just look down on their lowly origins? Or do you not want to share the benefits with them? In fact, I have long known that you have always been dissatisfied with me accepting smugglers as members of the alliance, but you do not know that their existence, whether it is the entire alliance or you and me, has great benefits. This benefit is not reflected in money or power, but is hidden and cannot be seen with the naked eye. I call it the competition mechanism." Competition. Old George obviously did not like this word and subconsciously frowned. For an old aristocrat like him, he had long been accustomed to enjoying the convenience of monopoly and completely did not understand the great benefits that competition could bring. Andre nodded expressionlessly. "That's right. It is competition. Perhaps you do not understand the meaning of it, but I will explain it to you now. First of all, you have to understand what is healthy competition and what is vicious competition. The former refers to the process of individuals or organizations competing for benefits under the premise of abiding by the industry's rules. Not only does this kind of competition not cause any harm, but it also maximizes the strength of both sides of the competition and continues to grow in confrontation with each other. The latter is the exact opposite. It is a kind of unscrupulous means to achieve the goal. Assassination, poisoning, hiring spellcasters to cast curses, and so on. As long as they can think of it, they will not hesitate to take action. In order to get what they want, these guys do not hesitate to trample on all the laws and morals in the world. They are out-and-out saboteurs. To some extent, the consequences of vicious competition are not limited to this. In serious cases, it can even lead to social unrest and make people lose their sense of security. Therefore, we must avoid vicious competition as much as possible and encourage healthy competition that can bring benefits and vitality. After all, humans are a very strange race. If there is an environment without external pressure, they tend to be content with the status quo and sometimes take big steps backward. However, if there was an evenly matched opponent, they would immediately become nervous, afraid that their interests would be taken over by the opponent. Then, they would use all means to force themselves to become stronger quickly. This was the sense of anxiety that many scholars had mentioned before. Whether it is a person or a country, if there is no sense of crisis, there is only one end waiting for it in the end, and that is destruction. Looking at history, there are countless similar examples, so there is no need for me to say more. What I want to say is that if you want to maintain your sense of crisis, you must have a suitable opponent, and the smugglers are the opponents that I have prepared for you. Think about it. If there were no enemies and the Alliance controlled most of the southern waters, what would you or your descendants do? It's very simple. The expansion of the Alliance will stop here. Apart from me, everyone will start to be satisfied with the current situation. They will lose themselves in the great wealth and power, slowly decaying and falling until they are replaced by a new force full of vitality, becoming the dust of history. Don't think I'm exaggerating. Look at the guilds that have ruled Valen City for hundreds of years. They're the best example. Due to the lack of competitors, the organization slowly evolved from an initial aggressive attitude to only wanting to maintain the status quo. In the end, I personally pushed them into the abyss of eternal damnation, and there was no possibility of them ever rising again. Could it be that you also want your family to face destruction one day? Andre's words were very serious, but also very thought-provoking. In particular, a few of the older elders lowered their heads in contemplation, as if considering whether they were wrong to exclude the smugglers. One must know that for the nobles, there was nothing more important than the inheritance of their family. In order to guarantee this, they were willing to do almost anything, even sacrificing themselves. Of course, the most important thing was that Andre explained a completely new point of view for them. That was that people were born in hardship and died in peace. Perhaps this was already a common theory on Earth, but it was still rather novel in this world. At the very least, one could tell from old George's expression of shock and fear that his heart was definitely not calm right now. In fact, the nobles had been researching since a long time ago on how to ensure that their family's inheritance would never end. They had tried to unify and centralize power, and they had also tried to spread out the heirs of the family who didn't have the right to inherit, and spread their branches and leaves in every corner of the continent. However, it was a pity that although these methods had achieved some results, they were still too far away from the word forever. If one were to flip through the ancient historical records in the library, they would discover that the number of famous clans that had been passed down from the ancient empires thousands of years ago was less than 5. Most of them had been weakened by the repeated wars and riots, slowly disappearing from everyone's sight. But now, the nobles suddenly discovered a completely new point of view, and that was that competition could maintain the family's internal unity and vitality. As if they had discovered a new continent, they couldn't hold back the excitement in their hearts and began to whisper to each other. The entire hall was filled with whispers, and it took a full 10 minutes before it gradually quieted down. Old George deliberately coughed twice to signal for everyone to shut up, and then asked solemnly, "How can you guarantee that there will always be a healthy competition between us and the smugglers? What if someone breaks the rules?" Seeing that everyone had accepted his idea, Andre immediately replied with a smile. "Hee, that's a good question. I've said before that the alliance isn't my alliance alone, but everyone's alliance. Therefore, we will establish rules that suit everyone's interests and ensure that even if the competition fails, you can still withdraw with the remaining wealth. At that time, whether you are a merchant or a noble, you will still be a noble. Your identity, status, and wealth will not be affected at all. In this way, the competition will be limited within the alliance, and it won't touch everyone's bottom line. As for the violation of rules that you mentioned, we can vote to decide how to punish according to the specific terms that the other party has violated. In this regard, the alliance will not be lenient. More importantly, in this competition, you have the absolute advantage from the start. If you still let the smugglers surpass you, then wouldn't you be a little too incompetent?" Chapter 881. Nobles were proud, but at the same time brave. Although they had the same shortcomings as ordinary people, at least they would not choose to run away. Even the weakest among them had the courage to raise their weapons in times of danger and fight to the death with the enemy. Since Andre had said so, old George naturally had to respond. After communicating with everyone present with his eyes, he immediately said confidently, "Very well. We'll believe you this time. Competition is competition. They're just smugglers. No matter how hard they work to develop, they can't be a match for the nobles." Then I'll wait and see." Andre nodded playfully and had no intention of refuting. As a transmigrator who lived in an extremely developed commercial area in his previous life, he was well aware of the difference between merchants and nobles. If it was a competition of comprehensive strength, the former would not be a match for the latter, at least not at this stage. However, if the competition was limited to the commercial field, the nobles would be completely insignificant. After all, in the process of pursuing profits, merchants would not care about the so-called face at all. As long as they did not exceed the scope of the rules, their imagination and creativity were far above everyone else, especially their lower limit, which was simply outrageous. Although the alliance had just been established, and the nobles had almost an absolute advantage, With the expansion of the alliance and the prosperity of trade, the smugglers would soon rely on their excellent business skills to slowly narrow the gap, and even completely overtake them. Hopefully, by then, these arrogant fellows would still be as confident as they were now. Old George had no idea that he and the others had jumped into a big hole dug by others. He pointed to the parchment full of treaties on the table and asked, "What do you think we should do with this? Are we going to let it become invalid?" Andre smiled and shook his head. "No, there's no need for that. Although I won't sign it, I can give you a guarantee that I won't spread the contents of the manuscript in the southern region, at least not on a large scale. So, it can still be a trump card for you. Is that so? That's great. I thank you on behalf of all the members of the Alliance." With that, Old George hurriedly stood up and bowed elegantly. Andre did not want to be rude. He stood up and bowed slightly. "You're too polite, my dear friend. Like you said, I'm also a member of the noble class and the founder of the entire Alliance. Naturally, I will consider the interests of the whole group." A conflict of interest erupted, but after the two of them looked at each other and smiled, it disappeared without a trace. The atmosphere in the hall instantly eased up. As the saying went, no matter if it was a country or an organization, conflicts always existed objectively. They couldn't disappear because of a certain person or something. Therefore, how to solve internal conflicts became the standard to measure the ruling ability of the superior. It was obvious that Andre had made a mistake. Not only had he turned the conflict between the nobles and the smugglers into a healthy competition, but he had also successfully achieved the balance of power. Looking at the eyes of the nobles in the hall, it was clear that they were no longer against this young man leading them. After returning to his seat, Old George carefully put away the manuscripts and parchments on the table, and then said in a deep voice, "The internal matters are settled. Should we now discuss the problem of the pirate fleet? You have to know that they are not as easy to destroy as gangs. As long as the ships and people are still there, there will always be a day when they rise from the ashes." As everyone knew, there were two reasons why the ancient profession of pirates could not be banned. First, the profits were too great. Even if they were the most successful in snatching a small boat with a carrying capacity of more than 10 tons, they could instantly get rid of poverty and live a wealthy life that countless people envied. Even many valiant fishermen would occasionally become pirates, looting small merchant ships that passed by. Second, there was too much mobility. As long as they were not completely wiped out in one go, even if only a dozen people and a ship escaped, they could quickly gather people and return to their old profession. It was precisely because of these 2 points that the pirates could quickly recover, even if they suffered heavy losses for a while. If they were allowed to find a deserted island or harbor where they could resupply and rest, it would not take long for them to take root like the pirates of the Sardinia Islands and become a headache for countless forces. Andre clearly knew what Old George was worried about. He smiled slightly. "Discuss? No, I don't think this matter is worth discussing. You just need to carry out the plan that has been formulated. Don't worry, this time, not a single pirate or ship can escape from my sight. So, you already have a complete plan?" Old George deliberately pretended not to hear the strong attitude revealed in his tone, completely putting himself in the position of being led. As they got to know each other better, he realized that it was not a bad thing to let Andre become the leader of the conservative nobles. After all, in the southern region where the feudal lords were fighting, finding a capable and ambitious leader was harder than finding pearls from the sea. "That's right. You don't have to worry about the pirates. You just need to hand over the command of the allied forces to me. I promise that by tomorrow's sunset at the latest, there will be no more pirates in the entire southern sea region, because the Alliance will replace them and become the most terrifying force in this region of the sea." After saying that, Andre reached into his waist bag and took out a piece of parchment that he had already prepared. He placed it on the table and slowly spread it out. There was a detailed drawing of a brand new design of a ship that was completely different from the existing one. "This is..." Old George stood up excitedly. He could tell at a glance that the ship on the drawing was very similar to the Eye of Arcane in terms of appearance, especially the holes on both sides. It was obvious that they were for cannons. The only thing that puzzled him was that although the drawing was very detailed, there was no length mark at all. Even if a shipwright obtained it, it would take a lot of effort to build it. Andre smiled as he knocked on the drawing and replied with a smile, this is a small gift and also the cornerstone for the Alliance to dominate the southern waters in the future. You may have noticed that there is no scale on it, because it can be big or small. It can be used as a merchant ship or a warship, and can even be used for both purposes at the same time. I can assure you that it is faster than any current ship type, and its ability to withstand wind and waves is also very strong. In essence, it is no different from the giant ship that I personally built. Chapter 882. Looking at the densely packed lines, Old George seemed to see a beautiful sailboat appearing on paper. It did not have the clumsiness of Lincoln City's main battleships, nor was it bloated like most merchant ships. It was like a young girl on a ship, showing off her outstanding grace. In particular, the three tall masts could definitely provide sufficient power for the ship. In addition, it could hang a large number of jib sails, bow sails, and stern sails. Even if the wind was against them, they could still adjust their course and achieve a very good speed. Most importantly, it was equipped with unprecedented weapons, cannons. Whether it was the shooting range or the accuracy, it was enough to pose a fatal threat to all types of ships. Once it reached a certain scale, not to mention pirates, even every port city in the southern seas would tremble under its deterrence. As the nobles of Lincoln City who relied on maritime trade to develop and expand, there was almost no one who did not know about ships. Thus, they began to talk excitedly with each other. Their eyes shone with a chilling, scorching light as they looked at the blueprint. Suppressing the excitement in his heart, Old George took a deep breath and sighed. You're really a demon who knows how to play with people's hearts. Tell me, what price do we have to pay to get it? From the moment he saw the blueprint, he knew that he could not refuse such a temptation. He only hoped that the price would not be too high. Otherwise, the nobles would lose their relatively equal status and completely become the other party's vassals. Demon? Ha! You're not the first person to describe me like that, and you won't be the last. It doesn't matter. If I'm a demon, then I'm a demon. It's still better than a demon, isn't it? Andre laughed self-deprecatingly. Due to his personality, he was always inclined to use benefits and brains to solve problems instead of simple and violent killings. This was similar to how demons lured mortals into depravity, so it was not surprising that he was described as a demon. It should be known that in the minds of many nobles, the word devil itself was not a derogatory term. Instead, it was the embodiment of wisdom and tactics. Some dictators and tyrants would even hire devils as their aides to help them suppress the resistance from the lower class. As for whether the tyrant would subdue the demon or the demon would cripple the tyrant, that would depend on who was more skillful. After laughing for a while, Andre quickly calmed down. He stretched out a finger and gently tapped the blueprint as if he was thinking about something. After about a minute or two, he slowly opened his mouth and said, Actually, my request isn't high. There are only 2 points. As long as you can agree to them, I'll take out the corresponding measurements. I guarantee that after any shipwright has seen it, they will be able to build the ship perfectly according to the data recorded on it. Please tell me, what are the 2 points? Old George knew that the price would not be small, but he had to listen to it anyway. After all, advanced shipbuilding technology was the cornerstone of dominating the ocean. Whoever had faster, sturdier, and heavier ships would gain a decisive advantage. Old George originally thought that the young man before him would never be able to produce the blueprint of the mystical eye. But now, it seemed that he had underestimated the young man's boldness and breadth of mind. First, in the future, this kind of sailing ship called a Galen ship can only be manufactured in the Sardinia Islands. You can have your own shipyard, but each ship must be clearly marked with a buyer. When the Alliance needs them, you have the right to temporarily requisition them. Second, I want you to hand over the ownership of all the private soldiers on the island. From now on, they will no longer belong to any family, but to the entire Alliance to maintain law and order and suppress riots. Andre had no intention of being polite at all. He stretched out 2 fingers and made his conditions clear. For him, technology and knowledge had never been a problem. The real problem was the lack of human resources. Whether it was the manpower in management or the manual laborers at the lower levels, none of them could satisfy his appetite. Intensification and industrialization were not things that could be done with 8 to 10,000 people. It required the participation of at least 1 million people, especially when the mechanical technology of this world was so backward. A large amount of labor was needed to make up for it. Perhaps magic could replace some of it, but it was still far from enough. Old George seemed to be aware of Andre's purpose. He stroked the beard on his chin and thought for a moment. Then, he immediately nodded in agreement. Yes, these 2 conditions are not harsh. We can accept them, but there is a problem. Who will those private soldiers that belong to the Alliance listen to in the future? Andre shook his head playfully and teased with a smile, "Ha, my friend, you are really a cautious old fox. You even noticed such a small detail. Well, it doesn't matter if I tell you. They will only be loyal to the Alliance in the future, not to an individual. After I deal with the pirates, I will transfer the military power to all the members of the Alliance. At that time, we will vote to decide who will be the commander of this army." Vote? Old George could not believe that the other party would hand over the command of the army so easily. An unconcealable surprise appeared on his old face. Yes, vote. Just as I promised before, the Alliance is an alliance of everyone. Every shareholder has the right to express their own opinions and decide the future direction of the Alliance. As long as they do not violate the rules set in advance, no one can interfere, including me. In order to drag the nobles into the water, Andre had also lost all his integrity. Without hesitation, he began to paint a big picture, creating an illusion of selflessness. But in reality, there was probably no one in the whole of Orire who knew how to operate a joint stock alliance better than him. For example, equity dilution, hostile acquisitions, and so on. As long as he was willing, he could take back the rights he had given out at any time. Undoubtedly, old George did not know about this. He was surprised and exclaimed, "I have to say that you are the strangest person I have ever met. You obviously have the ability to earn more profits alone, but you're willing to share with others. I'm now more and more convinced that you will definitely be a perfect ally. The only thing I want to say is that I wish us a happy cooperation." Ha ha! Please rest assured, I am a generous person, and I am never stingy in sharing power and wealth. The only thing I can't tolerate is betrayal. So, as long as you can promise to be loyal, I can guarantee that our cooperation in the future will be very happy. After saying that, Andre stood up and marked a few units of length in the blank space of the parchment. Then he glanced at the people who were looking forward to it, and there was an extremely sharp light in his eyes. Chapter 883. The nobles left with the huge sail design blueprint. They left contentedly, ready to find a secluded place to split the profits. Although in front of outsiders, these guys were a group, but in private, each of them represented their own family. There were many disputes and filthy disputes between each other. Behind closed doors, they would probably quarrel with each other to decide who would benefit the most from this ship innovation. After all, even if the Galen sailboat was not equipped with cannons, it was better than any existing merchant ship in terms of operation, speed, and carrying capacity. The nobles knew very well that without the cannon casting technology and gunpowder formula, they could not get their hands on warships. Therefore, they planned to monopolize the merchant ships directly. Even if they could not, they wanted to occupy as much market share as possible. This was because in the future, whoever could build more new merchant ships would have a greater influence on the sea merchants. Whether it was to earn more profits or suppress their competitors, it was a trump card that was hard to come by. However, Andre did not care about the thoughts of the nobles. He sat alone in the chair that originally belonged to the pirate king, Francis, in the castle hall. His handsome face did not have a trace of a smile, and he looked so lonely, as if he was separated from everything around him and even the whole world. Just as this inharmonious atmosphere became more and more intense, a beautiful figure suddenly appeared at the entrance of the hall. It was Mia, who had disappeared for a while. She did not care about showing her identity as a cat person, especially when she combined the elegance of a cat and the sexiness of a woman after shape-shifting. Her whole body exuded a powerful and fatal attraction. Even the soldiers guarding the door forgot to stop her and let her swagger through. Of course, even if the soldiers reacted, they would not be able to stop this cat person assassin who was known for her flexibility and agility. Mia ignored the stunned expressions of the soldiers and went straight to the chair. She knelt on one knee and said in a very pleasant voice, "Master, I have completed the task you gave me. All the remaining rat people have now united around Patty and elected him as the new leader. As long as you give the order, I can immediately get these guys to do anything for you." Andre nodded casually. "Well done. Control them well. Make sure they don't cause any trouble before the pirates are eliminated. Don't let them get involved in the upcoming battle." Mia licked her lips with a fervent expression and replied, "Understood. You'll soon see a tribe of 100% obedient rat folk. They'll worship you like a god." Perhaps she was influenced by the nature of the cat people, but she seemed to enjoy playing with the rat people in the palm of her hand. She even had a very strong cult tendency. God knew what kind of dangerous ideas she had instilled in those young fellows. The cults in Orier did not refer to churches that believed in evil gods. Instead, they referred to individuals or organizations that worshiped demons, devils, evil dragons, and other powerful creatures. Mages were naturally included in that category as well. Many residents of remote and backward areas, as well as those who live in the wild, such as gnolls, goblins, kobolds, orcs, half-orcs, and other races with low intelligence, were likely to be enslaved by the evil mages who intended to become gods. By preaching violence and fear, coupled with the various strange effects of magic, it wouldn't take long for these ignorant fellows to begin to worship the powerful mages. Eventually, they would become qualified fanatics. Don't think that this was a joke. There were always a few smart people in the world. Most of them were fools. This was no exception even in the 21st century where information was highly developed. Otherwise, there wouldn't be so many cults in the world and all kinds of terrorism spreading everywhere. In fact, the famous god of concealment, Victor, had used a similar method. Before he had become a real god, he had carefully established a church in the wilderness and cultivated believers. The moment he lifted up his throne, he had immediately advanced from the lowest level of divine power to the lowest level of divine power. He had pointed out the path for the latecomers who attempted to ascend to godhood with the body of a mortal. However, this method obviously touched on the sensitive nerves of the other gods. In addition, there were also demons and devils who stirred up trouble. Finally, under the proposal of the god of protection, all the gods jointly drafted an agreement. This was the famous declaration of faith in history. In this 100,000-word declaration, the rights and obligations between gods and believers were clearly stipulated. It also pointed out that those who had not yet become a member of the gods, no matter how powerful they were not qualified to receive the faith of mortals. They were defined as complete cults, and those who violated them would be jointly besieged by the churches of the gods. Although Andre scoffed at this treaty, which was similar to the Pope's Meridian Treaty on Earth, he did not want to attract the attention and hostility of the gods for no reason, because of the relationship between faith. The Pope's Meridian was in 1493 AD. In order to settle the maritime dispute between Portugal and Spain, Pope Alexander VI set the Meridian line 100 kilometers west of the Azores and Cape Verde Islands as the dividing line. He also assigned all the land west of the line to Spain and all the land east of the line to Portugal. This rude treaty did not take the inhabitants of the Asian, African, American, and Australian continents seriously at all. Even the French King Francis I had once mocked it. I want to see Adam's will. In his will, he divided the earth between Spain and Portugal. In order to prevent the bold cat girl in front of him from acting recklessly, Andre had to secretly sigh and warn her. "You know what, Mia? I don't care at all what you do to those little mice, and I don't care how you play with their feelings. I only hope that you remember one thing, and that is to not casually violate taboos, especially when it involves the gods and faith. I am a mage, a pursuer of knowledge and truth. I will never need the power of faith. Do you understand? In the face of Andre's warning gaze, Mia's heart trembled. She hurriedly lowered her head and carefully replied, "Yes, I understand, Master." "Very good. You may leave now. Don't get involved in anything before you receive my orders." After saying that, Andre waved his hand lightly and closed his eyes again. He leaned back in his chair as if he wanted a rest. "As you wish, my respected master," Mia muttered softly. She stood up and bowed respectfully before turning around and disappearing at the end of the hall. She did not even look at the soldiers guarding the door from the beginning to the end. She completely treated them as air, statues, and other decorations. Chapter 884. After Mia left, Andre took a 2-hour nap on the chair to relax his taut nerves. He then opened his eyes and began to make targeted arrangements. The first to take action was the Arcane I docked in the harbor, as well as all the other ships in the company. All of them followed the order to leave the harbor and hide on the other side of the island, quietly waiting for the signal from the lighthouse. Once the enemy entered the harbor, they would immediately seal off the escape route and destroy every ship that attempted to escape with their ferocious firepower. Next, the cannons dismantled from the ships were all placed near the high vantage points near the harbor. Every cannon was equipped with sufficient gunpowder and grape shot. They would be able to massacre the harbor with a single order. There were also many crossbowmen and musketeers placed at high vantage points along with the cannons. Their mission was to kill as many enemies as possible and strike at their morale. If possible, it would be best to stun the pirates in the first round. The last and most important part was the frontal battle, which was completely done by the professional soldiers of the Allied army. They were in units of 100, and they were scattered in the warehouses where the knights were hiding at the docks. After a long-range attack, they would rush out at the first moment, quickly cut the enemy apart, and then kill them bit by bit. As elites from the era of cold weapons, there was no need to doubt the close combat abilities of the nobles' private armies. This was especially true when they were in a square formation. Even if they were attacked by enemies several times their size, they would still be able to remain unmoved. Of course, the underground wizard tower wouldn't be idle either. Angus, who was in charge of the overall situation, would be monitoring the battle situation at the harbor through a magical mirror. He would immediately transfer energy and launch a fatal magical attack whenever there was a strong resistance. As orders were sent out from the castle hall one after another, this city that had just experienced an underground war, riot, and purge quickly operated according to Andre's will. With Willie Galt taking the lead, the remaining smugglers opened their secret warehouses one after another and offered up the food and daily necessities they had stored in case of emergency. In less than 3 hours, the entire Valen city regained a semblance of peace. Although many of the residents were still a little timid, they at least dared to walk out of their homes and buy the food they needed to survive in the market. The only thing they couldn't understand was that the unscrupulous merchants didn't take advantage of this opportunity to increase their prices and continued to sell at a fair price. This completely overturned the common people's understanding of the smugglers. If they had not seen the cunning in his eyes, they would have thought that the glory of the god of justice and law had finally descended upon this archipelago that had been forgotten by the civilized world. Obviously, all of this was instructed by Andre. He only had one goal, and that was to make the streets look more lively as soon as possible to prevent Pirate King Francis from noticing the turmoil in the city. While everything was proceeding according to the original plan, dozens of nautical miles away, the majestic fleet began to lower their sails, decelerate, and then drop their anchors. As the sun had already sunk below sea level, and the pirates did not want to risk sailing at night, it was inevitable that they stopped to rest. As they had just successfully destroyed the navy of their archenemy, Linton City, not long ago, everyone looked quite excited, especially on the deck of the ship, where drunken sailors and pirates full of nonsense could be seen everywhere. They didn't seem to be worried about being attacked at all, and were indulging themselves to their heart's content. Even the captains had no intention of restraining them, and instead joined in to fool around. But this wasn't surprising. After all, they had just experienced a thrilling naval battle. Although the number of casualties wasn't high, many of them were the elites of the elites. Just the captains, bosuns, first mates, second mates, and so on who had participated in the sneak attack numbered at least 90 people. Now, many of the officers on the ship were rookies who had been promoted from the bottom. Under the fear of death, every pirate was under immense psychological pressure, so they had to vent properly after their victory. If anyone dared to stop them at this time, it might immediately lead to a riot. Even Pirate King Francis could only let it be. Seawolf Kent stood on the deck at this moment, narrowing his eyes as he looked at the chaotic scene of the ship in front of him. The corners of his mouth rose slightly, revealing a trace of a cold smile. He then muttered to himself, "Drink, laugh, mess around. This is your last party before your death. When you return to Valen City, I'm afraid you won't even be able to cry." Just as he finished speaking, a sneaky little man crawled down from the mast and quickly approached him, saying in a low voice, "Captain, I just received a response from the lady. Captain Vesta is willing to join your side." "Oh, that old fox finally thought it through. Tell me, how many captains have already chosen to stand on our side?" Kent asked without turning his head. 40, my good captain. Now there are 40 ships that are willing to follow your lead. Once you successfully kill Francis, you will be the new pirate king." The little man excitedly waved his fist in the air as he replied, 40, huh? Seems a bit lacking." Kent muttered softly as he stroked the stubble on his chin, his gaze immediately becoming sharp. "But it doesn't matter. I believe that many people will make a wise choice before daybreak tomorrow. Otherwise, I'll have to send them to hell." The little man undoubtedly understood the meaning of his captain's words and immediately shivered in fear. He asked carefully, "Aren't you afraid that they'll tell Francis about this?" Kent shook his head with a disdainful smile. "No, they don't have the guts. The captains I've chosen are either dissatisfied with that old fellow Francis for a long time, or ambitious enough to obtain more power. To them, a dead pirate king is a good pirate king. I hope so. I'll continue to watch from the mast and inform you as soon as there's news." With that said, the short man bowed slightly, and then, like a monkey, he climbed to the top of the mast and silently watched the movements of the other ships. As a trusted aide of the Sea Wolf, he was well aware of the consequences of starting a rebellion. If they were lucky enough to succeed, then they would naturally soar to the top of their lives. But if they failed, all the participants were bound to suffer a bloody purge. If they were lucky, they could run out and do it alone. If they were unlucky, not only would they be hanged, but their families would also be unlucky. Kent did not pay attention to the complicated thoughts of his subordinates. He still stood expressionlessly at the bow of the ship, his eagle-like eyes staring at Francis' flagship. His right hand subconsciously gripped the hilt of his sword tightly, and his whole body exuded a faint murderous aura. As they got closer and closer to their destination, he began to have the urge to stab his sword into the other party's heart. Fortunately, there was only one night left. Otherwise, he was not even sure if he could control the bloodthirsty impulse in his heart. Chapter 885. A night full of conspiracies was always particularly restless. Many of the pirates involved could not sleep the entire night. The ships kept in contact with each other, and anyone who paid attention would notice the flashing lights at the bow and stern of the ships. However, it was a pity that Pirate King Francis did not realize this. He was now full of himself because of the unprecedented victory, immersed in the fantasy of building a pirate kingdom, unable to extricate himself. His trusted subordinates around him were doing their best to flatter him so that they could find a good position in the country that was about to be built. These pirates did not notice that the noose around their necks was slowly tightening. It would not be long before they were exhausted to death. When the sun rose from the horizon again, all the conspiracies disappeared with the darkness. The huge fleet had completely split into two camps at dawn. One decided to follow Seawolf Kent and start a rebellion, while the other decided to remain loyal to Francis and build an independent pirate kingdom. Especially after the anchors were raised again, The captains who had made their choice began to slow down, slowly gathering at the back of the fleet. For them, from the moment they made their choice, there was no turning back. With Francis' usual cruel and cunning style, there was no way he would let any of the rebels go. So, it was either success or failure. There was no third way. A strange atmosphere began to spread in the fleet. Many pirates who had not been completely numbed by the alcohol seemed to have noticed something. They immediately stopped drinking and started to carefully observe the movements of every ship around them. But Kent did not care about this. He had ordered before midnight that everyone on his ship was forbidden to drink, so the crew seemed to be in good spirits. No one in the world was a fool. No matter how low a pirate's IQ was, they could still find some clues from their captain's unusual behavior. Moreover, Kent had not concealed his intentions from the beginning. Even an idiot could feel the murderous aura emanating from his body. Just as he was caressing the coin with the image of a spider in his palm and considering whether to send a message to Andre, the coin suddenly began to turn red and hot, as if it was going to melt. Without any hesitation, Kent quickly returned to the captain's room and carefully locked the door before throwing the coin on the floor. Instantly, the golden coin began to melt into a pool of liquid, slowly spreading in all directions. Finally, it formed a circular plane that looked like a mirror. The figure projected on the flat surface was none other than Andre, who had been busy all night. As he hadn't rested for 2 days and 2 nights, he looked very tired. There were obvious dark circles around his eyes. He was holding a crown made of gold in his hand. The crown was inlaid with dozens of white pearls, the largest of which was the size of a chestnut. It was obvious that it was priceless. Kent didn't dare to be negligent. He immediately placed one hand on his chest and bowed deeply. "Master, do you have any instructions for contacting me at such a critical time?" Andre smiled and shook his head. "No, it's nothing. I just wanted to inform you that the pirates' fortress has been conquered and the underground guild has been completely eradicated. Now, the entire plan is only one step away." "What?" Kent was shocked. He quickly asked, "Didn't you plan to kill Francis first before touching the underground guild and the castle? Could it be that something has happened?" "Something happened?" "Yes, a lot of things have happened on the island while you were away, but that's not the main point. The main point is, how many pirates can you control now?" Andre asked while fiddling with the crown in his hand, avoiding the main point and dwelling on the trivial. Kent's attitude was obviously a little hesitant, but in the end, he gritted his teeth and answered truthfully, 1/3. 1/3 of the captains in the entire fleet have already defected to me. Some of them seem to want to be bystanders. Only a little more than 1/3 of the captains still choose to be loyal to Francis. As an ambitious person, he instinctively wanted to resist exposing his strength. But considering the terrifying means of this young man in front of him, he chose to compromise. After all, whether it was to obtain power or enjoy wealth, there was a prerequisite, and that was to be alive. Andre deliberately pretended not to see the unwillingness in Kent's eyes. He smiled meaningfully. Not bad. You have 1/3 here. Grays and Omar still have a portion. I think it should be enough. Remember, when we reach the shore in a while, tell your men not to rush to get off the boat. Stay here obediently, or else I can't guarantee their safety. Don't get off the ship. Don't you want us to attack first?" Kent frowned. He did not seem to understand why there was such a strange order. "No need. I have arranged everything in advance. You just need to be a bystander and watch with your eyes wide open. Watch how Francis is about to reach the peak of his life, and how I personally push him down the abyss. You can think of it as an opera that has reached the climax, and our dear Pirate King is the star of this play." After saying that, Andre's face quickly showed a mixture of coldness and cruelty. He handed the crown to Eunice, who was standing next to him. "Here, when Francis reaches the shore, you take the opportunity to offer this crown, and then say the lines I have prepared for you. When that old guy begins to think that he has been crowned king, use your weapon to cut off his head." The half-demon took the crown, and the corner of her mouth drew an arc. She said excitedly, "Wow. First give the enemy a beautiful hope, and then pull them back from hope to cruel reality. My dear master, You are really too evil, too cold and ruthless. Evil? Cold? No, 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 how can you think like that? I'll let the enemy taste what he dreamed of at the last moment of his life. How can this be considered evil and cruel? This is kindness. You know, in order to make this crown, I did not sleep for the whole night. Although Andre said this seriously, as long as one noticed the light in his eyes, one would know that he must be laughing in his heart. As for Kent, who had been silent all this time, his body was already soaked in sweat. He had always thought that he was cold and ruthless to his enemies. But now, seeing the feast that Andre had prepared for Francis, he immediately felt that he was as pure as a sacred samurai. God, was there anything more cruel in the world than standing at the peak of life and then being pulled into the abyss? If he could choose, Ken would rather never have such a day. Chapter 886. The southern seas in summer were always filled with all kinds of beautiful sceneries. The turquoise seawater, the magnificent coral reefs, and a large number of unknown tropical fishes shuttling back and forth. All of these together formed an indescribable scene, especially the frigate birds flashing across the sky, indicating to everyone in the fleet that land was not far ahead. Francis was standing on the deck at this moment, smiling as he admired the huge fleet under his control, his eyes showing great ambition. As an old man who could die at any time, he could not wait to build a pirate kingdom with his own hands, so that his descendants could be like real nobles and pass down the family line forever. Of course, this was not easy, because pirates who were used to being free and undisciplined would find it difficult to accept that there would be a group of nobles riding on their heads in the future. After all, they were not obedient serfs or tenants, but desperados who would take out their knives and kill people at the slightest disagreement. If they were angered, let alone an elected pirate king, even the real king would be killed without hesitation. Therefore, Francis wanted to take advantage of the aftermath of this great victory to settle the whole thing as soon as possible. Otherwise, as time passed, it was hard to guarantee that the captains would not have other ideas. In order to ensure that there were no accidents, he specially separated the two most prestigious captains, Kent and Grace. One stayed by his side to monitor, and the other was sent to launch a surprise attack on Lincoln City. In this way, the two could not collude in a short period of time to stop him from achieving his dream. It had to be said that Francis was worthy of being a pirate king for a full 20 years. He was quite outstanding in terms of tactics, and easily resolved the biggest threat. After that thrilling sea battle, whether it was Seawolf Kent or Pirate Queen Grace, their reputations had risen very quickly. In addition, they were so young and had obviously become a very big threat. Francis did not want to take decades of painstaking planning to benefit others in the end. Just as he was secretly thinking about how to ensure that he could become king, a lookout suddenly shouted, "Land! There's land ahead! We're home!" "What? That's great! Ha ha! We've finally returned safely. Damn it! After drifting on the sea for so many days, I must find a beautiful woman to vent after getting off the ship. Hee hee, count me in." Although we didn't get any spoils of war this time, we defeated the Lincoln City Navy. From now on, the entire South will be ours. Yes, this is worth celebrating. Long live the pirates. For a moment, everyone on the deck was shouting excitedly. To them, every time they went out to sea, it was like playing hide-and-seek with the Grim Reaper. If they were not careful, they would die without a burial place. Therefore, the first thing they did when they reached the shore was to completely vent the fear in their hearts. And the objects of their venting were nothing more than women, wine, tobacco, and delicious food. After all, in this backward world full of supernatural forces, there are too many things that could kill the crew, such as scurvy, plagues, cholera, lack of water, lack of food, heat stroke, storms, sea monsters, bacterial infections, and so on. If one were to count them carefully, there were almost 100 of them. Francis, who had been a pirate for his entire life, was well aware of the desire of the sailors. He laughed and announced, "Guys, as a reward for your bravery, I announced that after we reach the shore, everyone will receive 5 gold coins. As soon as his voice fell, the deck of the flagship instantly boiled over. Ha ha! This is exactly what I've been waiting for. Oh, thank you for your generosity. Long live the great pirate King Francis. Idiot, you should call him His Majesty the King. Long live the great pirate King Francis. That's right. Long live His Majesty the King. The pirates had always been outspoken and daring. They could basically say anything. So, after one person shouted His Majesty the King, everyone began to shout enthusiastically. Their voices were so loud that even the entire fleet could hear them clearly. Francis did not expect that his simple act of buying people's hearts would have such a great effect. His wrinkled, old face smiled like a blooming chrysanthemum, and his mouth could not close. However, just as he was feeling complacent, a man in his 40s quietly approached him and said in a low voice, "Father, are you sure you want to give everyone 5 gold coins? That's a lot of money. What's more, we didn't even get any benefits in this sea battle. In addition, there are many damaged ships that need to be repaired." You don't understand, my dear son. Money is a good thing, but compared to power and status, it's nothing. Don't be too obsessed with wealth. As long as I can become the king, you'll have inexhaustible wealth in the future. Sometimes, you don't even need to speak. Just a look, and people will offer you countless gold coins. As he said that, Francis reached out his right hand and patted the man's shoulder. He clearly knew that his son was used to the haggling style of the pirates, and his brain couldn't wrap itself around it for the time being. In fact, from the moment he defeated the Lincoln City Navy, Francis realized that he had to abandon his previous practice of only caring about gains and losses and consider the problem from the perspective of the overall situation. If there was no more money, he could snatch more. If there were no more women, he could find more. But if he lost his power, not only would he lose his money and women, but he would also lose his life and the lives of his family. Just like that, amidst the deafening shouts, the fleet slowly sailed into the dangerous waterways of the Sardinia. It did not take long before they successfully arrived at the bay near Valenport. The soldier in charge of the lookout on the lighthouse immediately sent the news to the castle at the top of the city. After André saw it, the corners of his mouth curled up slightly. He said to everyone in the hall, "Dear friends, our main actor is about to appear. You'd better get into your positions quickly. I don't want anything to go wrong with this perfect play. Remember, no one is allowed to act rashly before receiving orders." "As you wish, my master." Eunice, who was in charge of the assassination, bowed slightly, raised the magic potion in her hand, and drank it in one gulp. In just a few seconds, she turned from a beautiful half-demon into a seemingly ordinary pirate. Other than the faint smell of sulfur on her body, there was no flaw left. Chapter 887. Even though Valen City was a natural deep-water port, it was impossible to dock over 100 ships at the same time. Therefore, apart from Pirate King Francis' ship, the Lion, which was slowly sailing towards the plank road, the rest of the ships dropped their anchors in the harbor and lowered their boats for the sailors to row towards the shore. They had no idea that the Grim Reaper was already in place at the docks, brandishing his scythe and waiting to reap their lives. Only Kent, who had been notified in advance, signaled to the captains that they were on standby. He had no intention of letting his crew ashore and stood silently at the bow of the ship, ready to enjoy the show that was about to unfold. He was very clear that Francis was dead the moment he stepped onto the docks. With André's terrifying planning abilities, he could definitely let his enemy taste the joy of ascension. As someone who had personally experienced it, he would never forget how Uhtred had died. Even more so, he would never forget how the weapon master Sam, who looked down on him with disdain, had been killed so easily. Just like the saying went, brute force might be able to make people revere, but couldn't make people tremble from the depths of their souls like wisdom. However, Francis clearly didn't know this, nor was he in a mood for it, because he was surrounded by hundreds of people as soon as he stepped onto the docks. Young and beautiful women carried baskets, scattering fragrant flower petals into the sky. Men were cheering loudly at the top of their lungs, as if it was a grand festival celebration. Normally, with the pirate savage style, they would have drawn their knives and chased away any civilians who dared to approach them. But now, this scene just happened to scratch Francis' itch. After all, he felt that he was someone who was about to establish a kingdom and claim the title of king, and should show mercy to his future subjects. Therefore, instead of ordering them to be chased away, he laughed heartily and had his subordinates carry out a chest of silver coins, scattering them into the crowd. He walked along the plank road filled with shaman flowers towards the city, proudly saying to his son beside him, "Look, even the civilians think that I have the right to establish a kingdom on these islands. Remember, child, from now on, you have to learn how to think from a political point of view and not haggle over every little coin like before. As long as we can ascend to the throne, the entire Sardinia Islands will be ours." "Yes, father, I won't let you down." The man seemed to have been infected by the enthusiastic atmosphere in front of him, his eyes shining with excitement and anticipation. "King, so many dazzling words, especially for these pirates, who were defined as barbaric, ignorant, and cruel by the mainstream society of Orire. They were as unreachable as the clouds in the sky. But now, they were actually able to establish their own country, using the enormous fleet to make all the city-states in the Southern Sea region submit to the powerful military force. Who would dare to look down on them in the future? Call them stupid savages? No. If anyone dared to say those offensive words again, it would immediately bring disaster to the city he was in. When Francis was still immersed in the dream of power, wealth, and glory, a pirate in a white linen shirt suddenly appeared in front of him. He pushed the crowd aside and quickly came to Francis. He kneeled down on one knee and presented a delicate crown to Francis with both of his hands. "Great Pirate King, Francis, blessed by the gods, on behalf of all the people living on these islands, please allow me to present you with a crown." Without a doubt, this pirate was none other than Eunice, who was in the state of magical transformation. Although she looked unarmed and honest, and even had a fanatical expression on her face under the disguise, she was a fully armed half-demon with murderous intent in her eyes. Even her impassioned words just now were prepared in advance. If it weren't for Andre's insistence that she act well, she would have already rushed into the crowd, pierced through the enemy with her sword, and then started a massacre, watering the king's blood sword in her hand with blood and death. Francis, who didn't know that his life was in the hands of the enemy, subconsciously turned his head and glanced at his trusted subordinates behind him, trying to find out from their faces who had planned such a wonderful political show. It was simply too much to his liking. He had to take good care of him in the future. But unfortunately, everyone was as shocked as him, and a few people even revealed envy and jealousy in their eyes. After all, that was a crown that symbolized the supreme royal power, and anyone with a little ambition would yearn for it from the bottom of their hearts. Finding that no one among his trusted subordinates was the mastermind of this political show, Francis immediately turned his attention to the young man kneeling in front of him. Out of his years of caution, he didn't immediately reach out to help the other party. Instead, he cleared his throat and asked, "Child, tell me, where did this crown come from? Why are you willing to give it to me?" "It's the will of the gods. Great King, I've been having a dream for the past few days. I dreamt that you commanded the fleet and personally destroyed the powerful Linton City Navy. My old enemy screamed and wailed in the flames. When I woke up, this crown appeared at my bedside. I think that the gods want to use my hand to crown you as king here and now." With that, Eunice deliberately raised the crown in her hand high so that everyone around could see the pearls shining with white light. "Gods above, this is the great will of the gods. Francis will be our king." A bodyguard, who had been hiding in the crowd, shouted out the lines he had prepared beforehand. "Long live the great pirate King Francis. He says that he will lead the Sardinia to glory. To hell with the nobles of the continent. We will have our own kingdom." After the first shout, more and more people started to lose themselves in cheering. It was as if the entire Valen City had become the loyal supporters of the pirates in a single night. Even the old fox Francis slowly lost himself in the countless flattering voices. He started to believe that his coronation was a blessing from the gods. But in reality, all of this was just a show. The so-called commoners around the docks were all gang members from the lower city or servants of the smugglers. Their goal was simple, and that was to make the pirates lower their guard as much as possible and create the conditions for the following fatal assassination. As expected, Francis finally let his guard down completely under the efforts of the actors and reached out to take the crown from Eunice's hands. Chapter 888. The gorgeous golden hollowed-out sculpture was inlaid with dozens of rubies, sapphires, and pearls of various sizes. The design was like the top of a tower, giving people a sense of solemnity, and nobility at first glance. Francis could not find any words to describe his love for the crown. His hands trembled slightly as he held the dazzling crown in his palms. Then he raised it high and shouted in front of countless people, "In the name of the gods, I officially announce that I am crowned king here. Rejoice, my subjects. The Lincoln city that once dominated the entire Southern Sea region is now a thing of the past, and I will lead you to a future full of wealth, glory, and glory." As soon as he finished speaking, Eunice, who was kneeling on the ground, raised the corners of her mouth slightly, revealing a sarcastic smile. Then she suddenly rushed forward with lightning speed, snatched the crown, and used all her strength to fiercely smash the pirate king's bald head. Bang! With a muffled sound, this crown finally revealed its ferocious true appearance. The protruding parts of the originally gorgeous hollowed-out sculpture were all bent under the power of magic, forming hair-raising barbs that pierced straight into Francis's fragile scalp and hooked tightly onto his muscles and nervous tissue. Unless all the flesh above the brow bone was cut off, it was impossible to remove it. Under the intense pain, he could not help but let out a scream. Ah! The pirates who were still immersed in their sweet dreams a second ago were stunned. They could not believe that the pirate king was actually attacked inhumanely in his own territory. Just at the moment when everyone had not reacted, Eunice quickly removed her disguise and revealed her true appearance. She raised a magic longsword shining with red light and laughed loudly. "Ha ha 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 ha! Don't you want to be king? I'll fulfill your wish now. You must know that this sword loves to drink the blood of kings." After saying that, she raised the sword in her hand and chopped off Francis's head with the crown. Shock! The pirates were completely angered by Eunice's crazy actions to the point of trembling. Although many pirate kings had died an unnatural death, it was the first time they were beheaded in front of countless eyes like today. This was blatant mockery and contempt. Every pirate felt their faces burning, especially Francis' son. His eyes were about to spit fire. However, Eunice obviously didn't care about this. After killing Francis, she swaggered and picked up the bloody head on the ground. With a playful look, she mocked. "Hee hee, so this is your king? An idiot with a head full of fantasies?" To this, I only want to say, what right do you bunch of trash have to live in this world? Let me send all of you to hell. After saying that, she threw her head towards the street behind her. Her entire body was like an arrow released from a bow. Not only did she not turn around to escape, but she also rushed in the direction of the pirates. In just a few seconds, a rain of blood fell from the sky. At least 3 unlucky fellows had their heads chopped off, and 2 more had their throats slit and fell to the ground with a plop, becoming lifeless corpses. From the remaining fear in their eyes, it could be seen that they were unable to react at all before they died. They could only watch helplessly as death approached them. Damn it! Quick! Retreat quickly! Francis was dead. Our mission has been completed. No one knew who shouted in the crowd, but all the extras instantly came to their senses. With a whoosh, they disappeared from the streets like a receding tide. After all, they were unarmed and didn't want to have a direct confrontation with the ferocious pirates. As soon as these people retreated, they heard a deafening explosion. Boom! A cannon hidden in a high place finally couldn't hold back and shot out a large number of sparks and fatal grapeshot bullets. Under the impact of the gunpowder, the metal balls that broke through the restraint of the bullets scattered in all directions. It was like a shotgun that had been magnified dozens or even hundreds of times. At least 6 or 7 people were killed in an instant. The same number of injured people fell to the ground, screaming and groaning in pain. Monster! Monster! A very young pirate was obviously frightened by the tragic scene around him. He screamed and turned around to escape. In his eyes, the weapon that had let out a loud explosion was simply too terrifying. Before he could react, countless of his companions had fallen to the ground and died. However, before he could run far, a musketeer that had been lying in ambush on the roof suddenly pulled the trigger. Bang! Accompanied by the crisp sound of a gunshot, this unlucky fellow fell to the ground. His back had been hit by a lead bullet, creating a very large horn-shaped cavity. Although it looked fine on the surface, his heart had been completely shattered. After twitching for a few seconds, he breathed his last. The other cannoneers, musketeers, archers, and crossbowmen lurking in the surroundings were not to be outdone. They crawled out of their hiding places and launched a fierce attack on the pirates near the pier. In an instant, the sound of cannons, gunshots, shouts, and screams could be heard incessantly. In less than 10 minutes, the number of enemies began to rapidly decrease. Mutilated corpses quickly piled up on the streets, and black-red blood flowed slowly down the slope into the sea, dyeing the seawater red. Sitting in the wizard tower, Andre sighed slightly and pointed at the image transmitted back from the magic mirror. Sigh, it seems that I have overestimated these pirates. They are not as brave and valiant as I thought. Without the protection of the ship and the sea, they are as lame as ducks on land. They're just a group of lowly pirates. How good can you expect them to perform? If it weren't for the support of the Wizard Tower and Gerald, the power of the Association of Mages alone would have been enough to destroy this motley crew. Boris sneered sarcastically while fiddling with the brain soaked in the solution. Ever since he discovered the wonderful function of the corpus callosum, he had developed a strong interest in the structure of the brain. He had been trying to figure out how thoughts and consciousness were produced. Andre smiled and shook his head. No, Master, you have to admit that the pirates entrenched in the Sardinia Islands are still somewhat useful. At least in terms of destruction and plunder, very few people can be compared to them. Destruction and plunder? Boris seemed to have noticed something. He put down the brain in his hand, turned around, and stared at Andre with bright eyes. After a full minute, he asked, "You're not planning something bad again, are you?" "Don't worry. I just want to end this boring game and make those who have offended me pay a heavy price at the same time. You haven't forgotten my identity, have you? The Flaming Duke wants to use destruction and death to please Aesop Desir, and I happen to have a good target." As he said this, a dark blue flame suddenly burst out from Andre's palm. It looked so beautiful and charming. Chapter 889. As the president of Linton City's Mage Association, Boris's political sensitivity was naturally not low. After thinking for less than half a minute, he raised his eyebrows in surprise. "Oh, heavens, you're really crazy. You're actually planning to destroy Bakharov City? Ha ha, why not? This is a world where the strong preys on the weak. Anyone who makes a choice has to bear the consequences. Moreover, if you want to build the Sardinia Islands, you can't do it without a sufficient population. After all, it's not easy to find a target that can legitimately take revenge and plunder resources." Andre laughed as he spoke of the idea that he had been planning for a long time, not hiding his malice towards Bakharov City. In fact, he wanted to completely destroy Bakharov City, not just to take revenge on them for surrounding the Eye of Arcane. There were many other complicated factors involved. For example, as the chosen of the Fire Elemental Prince, Aesop Desir, he had to burn to death at least 5,000 intelligent life forms within a year, or turn a city into ashes. Otherwise, the other party would withdraw the power of the Flames of Wrath. Bakharov City clearly had a very close relationship with Loretta, As the saying went, the friend of an enemy was an enemy. Andrei would not hesitate to execute any method that could weaken the enemy. Moreover, he had previously received a large-scale mission, the trade war. Even if it was for the generous rewards, he could not easily let go of a target that could be defeated without much effort. It could be said that the entanglement of many interests ultimately led to Andrei's determination to destroy this bustling port that had stood in the southern seas for hundreds of years. He would use the wealth and population he plundered to speed up the rise of the Sardinia Islands and the trade union. In any case, the Flaming Duke was originally a symbol of burning and destruction. He wanted to use this method to announce to the world that Aesop Desser's chosen had returned. After all, war was never child's play. Since they had chosen to join in, they had to be prepared to die. Andrei would never show any mercy to his enemies. Be it nobles or civilians, there was no difference at all. They were all part of the war. Before ensuring that his enemies had lost all their potential, he would not show any mercy. Boris sighed slightly and said softly, "Yes, this is a world where the strong preys on the weak. Everyone has to be responsible for themselves. Although I don't agree with you using such a violent method to take revenge, I don't agree with you. But as the Flaming Duke, you do indeed have an excuse to destroy Bakarov City. Even the churches of the gods have nothing to say. But remember, don't take the initiative to provoke the temple. Believe me, it doesn't feel good to be hated by a god, even if it is the weakest god." Andrei nodded in agreement. "Thank you for your reminder. Rest assured, even an idiot like me knows what it means to attack a temple. Although the gods can't casually send down saints and incarnations like before, they still hold unimaginable power. I don't want to cause trouble for myself. It's best that you understand this. Hurry up and end this farce. You're still so young. You shouldn't limit yourself to one place for the sake of power. Go out more, take a look, and enrich your knowledge and experience. It will be very beneficial for your growth." After saying that, President Boris raised his head and glanced at the left eye with the eye patch before turning to leave the central control room. Watching the old man's back disappear outside the door, Andrei subconsciously touched the eye patch and muttered to himself in a voice that only he could hear, as expected of an archmage. He can actually detect the energy ring emitted by the arcane eye. "Looks like I'll have to be more careful." While the two were talking in the wizard tower, the bloody battle at the docks had come to an end. With the addition of knights and troops, the pirates who had suffered heavy losses had completely collapsed. Although their resistance was still very fierce, it couldn't hide the fact that they were losing ground. Many of the smarter ones had already jumped into the small boats and rowed towards the larger ships in the bay. Their goal was simple, and that was to steal a ship and leave the island. But it was a pity that Ken had long since regarded all the ships in the bay as his exclusive property. How could he allow anyone to steal? With a wave of his hand, the Sea Wolf immediately raised its sails and charged straight towards the place where the small boats were the most concentrated. For a moment, countless small boats that couldn't dodge in time were instantly crushed. The pirates on them also sank into the water one after another, their fate unknown. Even if a few lucky ones returned to the large ships alive, they couldn't pass through the narrow waterway because the arcane eye hidden at the back of the island was blocking the only exit. All the ships that tried to rush over had only one outcome, and that was to be sunk by the ferocious cannons. No mercy, no mercy, no captives. This meticulously planned massacre lasted for an hour, until Eunice chopped off the head of the last unlucky pirate. Only then did it completely come to an end. Due to drinking a large amount of blood, the magic sword in her hand was a dazzling red. Moreover, there was a kind of sunlight-like energy flowing slowly on the blade and finally seeping into her skin along the hilt. There was no doubt that the energy was the life energy absorbed in the massacre. Feeling the energy passing through her blood to every cell, Eunice opened her blood-stained lips slightly and couldn't help but moan. "Oh, this feeling is really great. My dear baby, you can definitely make me stronger." A few soldiers who were cleaning the battlefield and carrying the corpses heard this and immediately shivered in fright. They ran away at the fastest speed and disappeared without a trace. They had seen with their own eyes how crazy and terrifying a half-demon was in battle, especially with the help of the magic sword. She wasn't afraid of being injured at all. Coupled with her superhuman strength, she was completely a killing machine. Even the triangular tail hidden under the cloak could easily pierce the throat of an ordinary person. The battlefield was always the best place to show people's reverence for the strong. Perhaps as a half-demon, Eunice could never be accepted by the mainstream society. However, she had built a terrifying reputation through killing. Many people privately admired her battle record of killing 100 people. The proud knights also withdrew their discriminatory gazes. As mentioned before, Orir was a world where strength reigned supreme. Here, as long as you had strength, regardless of whether it was good or evil, you would get the respect you deserved. Chapter 890. Looking at the hundreds of corpses thrown into the sea for the sharks to feast on, Kent suddenly felt a chill run down his spine. This was because he suddenly realized that although the person he was loyal to was not evil, he was very, very cold-blooded. Especially in the process of carrying out the plan, he was like a precision instrument that would not waver from beginning to end. One must know that most people were easily influenced by emotional factors and constantly changed their thoughts. However, Andre was the opposite. Once he made a decision, he would not change it easily, even if it meant shedding a river of blood. There was no doubt that such a person was dangerous, and could even be described as terrifying. In their eyes, emotions were only one of the many gauges to measure value. Unless it was a close friend or a blood relative, it would be difficult to have any real impact. Kent did not think that he had any feelings for Andre. At best, he was just a more important chess piece. If he did not want to be betrayed or abandoned one day, the only way was to continuously display his value until he was irreplaceable. Obviously, this was not easy. After all, there was no one in the world who was irreplaceable. Even the high and mighty gods were no exception. Just as Seawolf's imagination was running wild, several pirate ships began to slowly approach. When the first mate saw this scene, he immediately lowered his voice and reminded, "Captain, you'd better be prepared. The massacre at the dock just now has frightened the others. They must have come to question you about what happened." Question? The first mate's words pulled Kent back from his thoughts. He curled his lips in disdain and sneered. Humph. Don't these idiots understand the situation? No matter. I will soon let them understand that there are only two choices left: surrender or be destroyed. Isn't this a bit too forceful? After all, although these captains have joined your side, they are still independent. If they turn hostile, I'm afraid it will be difficult for us to deal with them alone. The first mate was extra careful when he said this, afraid that he would accidentally anger the temperamental Seawolf in front of him. Recently, he found that his captain's style of doing things was becoming more and more mysterious. Especially the ambush on the shore against Francis, he did not hear anything about it at all. Kent didn't care about the frightened expression on the first mate's face as he continued. I'm being tough now for their own good, because at most I'll make them lose some face. But if they still put on this face when they see Master, they'll immediately die in the most miserable way possible. I don't want them to die, so I have to use other methods to make them understand this. Master. The first mate seemed to have heard something inconceivable, and his eyes widened. He couldn't imagine that someone as unruly as Seawolf would submit to someone else. Why? Do you find it strange? Kent asked with a smile. In fact, if one paid a little attention, one would notice that there was a trace of bitterness and helplessness hidden in his smile. How could a truly ambitious person be willing to submit to someone else? In the end, he was forced into a corner. In order to save his own life, he had no other choice. The first mate was so shocked by the news that he couldn't recover for a long time. Naturally, it was impossible for him to notice such a subtle change. After a full 2 to 3 minutes, he asked with a trembling voice, Captain, is this true? Are you kidding me?" Kent sneered and asked back, "Do I look like I'm kidding? Or do you think that I can command a regular army of several hundred men and so many knights?" The first mate hurriedly waved his hand. "No, I didn't mean that. It's just that knowledge is too shocking. I can't accept it for a while." As he spoke, his eyes kept darting around. There was no need to ask to know that he had his own thoughts. But Kent didn't have the intention to expose him. He only glanced at him with contempt. "All right, then take your time to digest it. I'm going to see the other captains. Remember, don't let me find out that you're betraying me, or else." In order to increase the sense of mystery, he deliberately didn't say the second half of the sentence, allowing the other party to freely imagine. After all, the human brain would make terrible associations under certain circumstances, so some words left unsaid were far more threatening than saying them out loud. An hour later, in the castle hall located at the highest point of the city, Andre was sitting on a chair. His right hand gently tapped on the table, and he stared at the pirates standing in front of him with indifferent eyes. After a series of tough threats from Seawolf, these guys were finally more sensible. They didn't choose to resist, nor did they choose to escape. They obediently went ashore and prepared to be reorganized. Of course, it wasn't that they didn't want to leave, but that the Eye of Arcane was blocking the only way out. The terrifying bombardment was enough to send any ship to the bottom of the sea to feed the fishes. Unless they encountered a situation where the tide completely covered the reef, they could only go around the other side. Otherwise, they could only choose to surrender. To some extent, these pirate captains appeared in the hall only because of the situation. There was no so-called loyalty to speak of. If they were all released, they would all run away in a few days. But Andre didn't care about this at all. He directly nodded to the restless Seawolf. "Kent, you've done well. Now let's talk about the arrangements for these captains." "You flatter me. Please speak. I'm always at your disposal." Kent lowered his posture and bowed respectfully. He didn't even look back at the unsightly expressions of the pirates behind him. He tried his best to show his humble side. Andre smiled playfully and went straight to the point. "It's very simple. I've never been an arbitrary and tyrannical person, let alone a tyrant. So I'll give everyone two choices. First, accept the reorganization and become a real navy. I'll give everyone a generous monthly salary according to their position. You can get married and have children on this land, and enjoy all the rights you should have, but you must guarantee that you'll obey orders 100%. Second, continue to do your old business and plunder the passing merchant ships. But there's a condition. Any merchant ship flying the flag of the Alliance must not be attacked. Otherwise, even if they escape to the ends of the earth, I'll find them and kill them with the cruelest means. Moreover, 40% of all profits must be handed over. In return, I'll allow you to resupply and rest in the Sardinia Islands, and at the same time guarantee that your private property will not be violated. Don't worry. Think carefully before giving me an answer, because once you've made a choice, you can't change it." Chapter 891. The pirate captains looked at each other, and no one said a word for a long time. They did not know Andre well, and were afraid that this was a trap or a method to eliminate dissidents, so they were all waiting for the first person to try it. After all, Andre looked too young. He didn't even have a few strands of beard on his chin. It was obvious that he was still underage. If it wasn't for Kent's respectful attitude, they would have suspected that this was a specially arranged scam. Humans were very strange creatures. Once they were suspicious, they would keep guessing, hypothesizing, and associating until they became neurotic and paranoid. However, pirate captains were not all cautious fellows. Occasionally, one could find a few brawny men who were simple-minded, well-developed, and liked to think with their muscles. After 5 minutes of silence, a slightly shorter, sturdy man squeezed out of the crowd impatiently and said in a low, muffled voice, "I'm a free pirate. I don't like to be restrained too much, so I choose the second option. Continue doing my old business." "No problem. Please stand over here." Andre extended his left hand and gestured. Although the man did not understand what was going on, he walked over obediently. With the first example, a few other captains who could no longer hold themselves back stood out and chose to continue plundering the merchant ships. Although it pained them to hand over 40% of the profits, considering that the proportion they had to hand over to the Pirate Alliance was not low in the past, and that they had to accept Francis' orders, As long as they could maintain their independence, it did not matter even if they had to sacrifice a little profit. After all, it was a business that did not cost them anything. It had to be said that there were quite a few people who had such thoughts. In just 10 minutes, nearly a third of the people stood to the left of Andre. Most of them were pirate captains who were younger or in the prime of their lives, so they were not willing to become navies bound by all kinds of rules and regulations. They still desired to carve out a place of their own in the sea. Andre did not care about these guys at all. No matter what, they had to serve the commercial alliance that was about to be established. Just like in the 16th to 19th centuries on Earth, in order to compete for maritime hegemony in colonies, the European countries issued privateering licenses to their own pirates. He also wanted to use these pirates to fight against competitors, cut off their maritime trade, and ensure that the alliance always had a monopoly. Kent remained silent as he coldly observed the choices of his former colleagues. He was also secretly guessing what the motives behind these two choices were. In fact, before going ashore, Seawolf had secretly contacted some people, but Andre's methods were obviously beyond his expectations. Now, he could only watch the development of the situation and couldn't intervene at all. Half an hour passed quickly. Seeing that no one else took the initiative to step forward to choose, Andre stood up and asked the remaining people with a smile, "What? Haven't you thought it through? Or have you already made a choice in your hearts and are just unwilling to say it out loud? It doesn't matter. Since none of you are willing to take a stand, I'll give you a little help. From now on, for those who remain in place for 10 seconds, I'll assume that you've automatically chosen the first option. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6. Along with the clear countdown, the captains who stayed in place began to suddenly become nervous. Some of the more timid ones' foreheads were already covered with sweat. Some even opened their mouths several times to speak, but in the end, for some reason, they swallowed their words back down. Andre did not give the other party any time to think. He cleanly finished the 10-second countdown, then clapped his hands and announced loudly, "Very good. It seems that everyone has made a choice. I now officially appoint you as the first fleet of the Sardinian Navy. In the next month, everyone will begin to receive my reorganization and training. I will disperse all the crew, eliminate the unqualified, and leave only the true elites. Since I've given you the treatment of officers, I will naturally require you to reach the corresponding professional standards. Remember, don't do stupid things and don't think that you can still be as free and undisciplined as before. The Navy has to look like a Navy, and the duty of soldier is to obey, obey, and obey. Disband now. Before the sun rises tomorrow, you can still be pirates for one last day. Go party to your heart's content, because in the next month, you will taste the taste of hell." After saying that, the corners of his mouth curled up slightly, and a chilling smile appeared. He waved his hand hard, indicating that 2/3 of the captains could leave. Hearing the words disperse, reorganize, and train, the captains' expressions could be said to be extremely interesting. Some of their eyes even emitted flames of anger. If not for Kent's warning in advance, they might have exploded immediately. It must be known that in the age of sail, the supreme status of the captain was reflected to the greatest extent in the understanding of his subordinates. If the original manpower was withdrawn and a group of new people was stuffed in, it meant that the sailors would be divided, and they would no longer be able to fully control their ships. In the eyes of the pirate captains who had a strong desire for control, this was simply digging out their roots. But unfortunately, no matter how angry they were at this moment, they did not dare to resist. They could only hold back their anger and turn to the taverns and inns in the lower city to vent it with women and alcohol. After watching these guys leave, Andre turned around and said to Kent, who had remained silent from beginning to end, "I promised before that after you completed the mission, you would receive a satisfactory reward. Now, the first fleet of the Sardinian Navy belongs to you. You must guarantee that you will completely subdue them within a month. This is both a right and a test. Don't let me down, understand?" When Seawolf heard this, he was overjoyed. He hurriedly knelt on one knee and promised loudly, "Please rest assured, I swear that I will never let you down." No matter what happens in the future, this fleet will be 100% loyal to you. Andre nodded in satisfaction. I hope so. Go and do your thing. I want to have a chat with these captains who are determined to continue being pirates. In addition, you'd better hurry up and let the first fleet have combat power, because in at most 2 months, I will personally start a war that will completely destroy Baccarat City. I hope you can perform well at that time. Wherever your will is, that is where my sword points. Kent was not stupid. He knew what questions could be asked and what questions were best kept in his heart. After bowing, he also left the castle hall. Chapter 892. Seeing that the originally crowded hall was now empty, the remaining dozen captains who had chosen to continue their old trade began to feel uneasy. They urgently wanted to know how this young man would treat them. Just as one of them was about to say something, Andre suddenly pulled on the tab on the wall. In an instant, a large and crude map fell from the sky and appeared in front of everyone. Although it looked crude, and even the topography wasn't very accurate, everyone present could easily tell that this was a map of the entire South. Excuse me, what do you mean by this? A captain couldn't hold back his curiosity and cautiously asked. Andre smiled faintly and didn't answer the question directly. Instead, he pointed at the trade route known as the Golden Triangle from Lincoln City to Baccarat City, and then to Kamla City, the Pearl of the Desert. He cleared his throat and said, the Golden Triangle. He cleared his throat and said, I believe all of you should be very clear that if the entire southern region is compared to a person, then this route I'm pointing out is equivalent to the main artery. It started from Linton City, which was connected to the continent in the east, and ran through the most prosperous plains in the south. Millions of nobles, civilians, and serfs relied on this route to exchange goods they needed, including salt, cloth, weapons, armor, spices, livestock, poultry, food, and so on. If someone can monopolize this route, it means that they can indirectly control the lives of millions of people. As long as they cut off the supplies to a certain place, that place will quickly fall into unavoidable panic and turmoil. This is especially true for the Great Kamla Desert, which stretches for more than 1,700 kilometers. Basically, 40% of the grain is bought through trade. Thus, I've formulated a plan to monopolize this route. Of course, this isn't easy because we have many competitors who are very powerful. There are even terrifying behemoths like the Whale Merchant Group. However, we also have an advantage that others don't have. That is, we have more advanced ships and weapons. You should have already seen the might of the cannons on the giant ships. It can guarantee that within the next 60 to 100 years, no country or city will be able to threaten our hegemony at sea. Now, please tell me, do you intend to continue being a lone pirate, or do you intend to join us and become a privateer captain with a strong backing? What's the difference? A man in his 30s asked with a frown. He obviously didn't understand why the other party would suddenly mention this. Normally, shouldn't such an ambitious plan be kept strictly confidential? Andre shrugged with a smile and explained, there's a big difference. I happen to have some time now, so I'll explain it to you. Firstly, as a privateer captain, he had to rob a specific merchant ship in a designated area. Secondly, without permission, it was strictly forbidden to kill captives after victory. Finally, although privateers were nominally owned by individuals, they were actually part of the Navy. When necessary, they had to accept compulsory recruitment and participate in battle. As the saying goes, you get what you pay for. As long as a privateer captain promises to abide by the terms above, he will be able to purchase the newest ships, weapons, and even magic potions and equipment from us. I will provide a detailed price list later. As for ordinary pirates, they won't be able to enjoy any benefits. Similarly, there aren't too many compulsory measures. As long as they hand over 40% of the profits on time and don't attack ships flying the Alliance's flag, they can do whatever they want. As the last word was spoken, the captains fell into deep thought. After all, this was a choice between freedom and rights. They could either give up their freedom and choose the benefits at their fingertips, or give up the benefits and roam the seas freely. There was no need to ask to know that they were struggling in their hearts. After a full 5 minutes, a man with a red face stood up and said while panting, "I'm willing to be a privateer, Captain. But before that, I have a question to ask." "Ask away." Andre gestured with his arm. "How do you guarantee the interests of a privateer, Captain? Or how do you differentiate between ordinary pirates and privateers?" Andre laughed and clapped his hands. "Ha, that's a good question. I will issue a privateer license to every privateer, Captain. Only those who hold this certificate will be able to enjoy all sorts of benefits. We will even be responsible for selling the stolen ships for a good price." "Privateer license?" The man with the red face was shocked. This was the first time he had heard of something like a privateer license. "That's right, a privateer license. It records the current opponents of the Alliance, and, at the same time, the targets of your plunder. It specifies the relationship and obligations between the captain and the Alliance in writing, so you don't have to worry about getting rid of the donkey after it has outlived its usefulness. How about it? Are you satisfied with this answer?" Andre was very clear about the dangers of a privateer license, and also understood that he was opening the door to hell. But in order to reduce the speed of the Alliance's rise, he had no choice but to use some extreme methods. Otherwise, purely relying on commercial competition would never be able to truly defeat a huge trade organization like the Whale Merchant Group. A captain who was quick-witted suddenly realized something and exclaimed, "Oh, damn it! Is this the legendary legal plunder?" Yes, from a certain perspective, a privateer license is a legal way to plunder a merchant ship. But the prerequisite is that the target must be limited to a specified area. I guarantee that as long as you choose to join, you will not lack wealth, reputation, or status in the future. In order to make the conditions sound enticing, Andre didn't hesitate to cast another silent spell. As the effects of the friendly spell began to show, the hesitant pirate captains gradually became fanatical. Not long after, they all chose to become privateer captains. Andre wasn't careless either, and issued over a dozen privateer licenses on the spot. At the same time, he determined the current enemies, which were Barcarlos City and Lincoln City. He wanted to destroy the trade system of these two cities once and for all, so that their merchants wouldn't dare to go out to sea. He wanted to force them to change from an ocean-based city to an inland one. If possible, it would be best to erase their ability to build ships. Chapter 893. With the death of Francis, the entire Sardinia Islands came under Andre's control as scheduled. However, he did not become idle because of this. Instead, he became even busier. After all, the occupation was only the beginning. The following construction and modifications were the main event. In particular, the shipbuilding industry, cannons, gunpowder production, and so on required a lot of manpower. The docks that the pirates had originally built also needed to be expanded as much as possible in order to meet the huge demand for ships in the future. In addition, the trade union was still in the initial stage, and various rules and regulations needed to be perfected slowly. Thus, it took a lot of time just to hold meetings, quarrel, and vote every day. In addition to the above, Andre also specially sent people to the many islands further south to buy a batch of obedient slaves from the Matek Lord. He began to plant sugarcane on a large scale in the wasteland around the Sardinia Islands, preparing to turn this place into a huge sugar processing base. One had to know that sugar was a luxury and condiment that was even more precious than salt. Its price was as heavy as gold. Due to its low production, many wealthy inland nobles had never even seen sugar in their entire lives, let alone eat it. The only sweet thing they had tasted was honey. It was said that only 2 places in the entire Orier had the technology to produce sugar. One of them was in the farthest east, and the other was in the west, far away from the mainland, Cook Island. Usually, very few merchants dared to risk their lives to cross the deep sea to buy expensive sugar. Even if they were lucky enough to reach it alive, they might not be as lucky to return safely. In this world, the dangers from the sea were not just ordinary problems such as storms, pirates, and scurvy. There were also terrifying monsters hidden below the surface of the sea, as well as dozens of intelligent marine creatures, including murlocs, dragon eels, dragon turtles, demon whales, sea giants, sea trolls, giant sea snakes, and sea dragons. In short, there were as many terrifying creatures that could capsize a wooden ship. The closer one was to the deep sea, the higher the possibility of encountering them. Unless one was a desperate gambler, no one was willing to risk their life by going to Cook Island to buy cane sugar. This also meant that once Andre's sugarcane matured in February next year, he would be able to reap an unimaginable amount of wealth. At that time, the merchants would definitely be like sharks that smelled blood. They would swarm over and fight over the purchase of sugarcane. Of course, for now, this was just a fantasy in his mind, and it wasn't worth spending too much time and effort on. As the elite nobles participated in the planning and management of Valen City, the city quickly regained its former prosperity. Countless age buildings were demolished, and from a high vantage point, the city looked like a giant construction site. The busy figures of commoners could be seen everywhere. Through the economic means of providing relief through work, the originally poor and destitute people at the bottom were shocked to find that their tight pockets were actually beginning to become rich. Now that they had money on hand, they naturally wanted to spend. They bought all kinds of daily necessities to improve their quality of life. The hawkers and merchants in the market quickly realized that some goods were easier to sell than before. The smugglers, who were keenly aware of the business opportunity, immediately mobilized their own channels to mobilize supplies from other places. Andre had used less than a tenth of the wealth in the guild treasury to completely change Valen City's originally abnormal economic structure. As he had once pointed out, as a ruler, hiding a large amount of money secretly was the most foolish choice. But it was a pity that truly smart people were always in the minority. Even old George had initially thought that Andre was crazy for giving the commoners such a generous salary. But the changes in the city in the next few days made him feel incredulous. He immediately sent a servant to secretly record the entire process, intending to bring it back as an experience to pass on to his descendants. As the days passed, everything started to go on the right track. The small gangs in the lower city slowly transformed under the guidance of the new policies, no longer relying on the meager protection fees to survive like before. Only the rat men, who were still immersed in their hatred, were still tirelessly searching for old Bernie's murderer. Standing on the top floor of the castle in the luxurious room that originally belonged to the pirate King Francis, Andre looked out the window and admired everything he'd created in the short span of a week. An indescribable sense of accomplishment welled up in his heart, because he'd established civilization and order with his wisdom and hands. He'd brought hope to this island full of darkness, ignorance, and savagery. Light, breathing in the slightly salty sea breeze, he smiled and muttered to himself, "This is wonderful. This is the world I want to see, and it can only get better. My dear, I don't know if this city can become better, but if you don't come to the bed and give me a morning kiss now, I'll immediately become very bad." Chloe, who had just woken up, rubbed her eyes and casually lifted the quilt, revealing a pair of crystal-clear white tender feet and a white translucent nightgown, playfully teasing him. In the past few days, she'd returned to her clingy self in Linton City. Every day, she ate and slept with her fiancé. Except for the last stage, the two had done everything they could. They were basically no different from a real husband and wife. "Good morning, you naughty little thing." As Andre spoke, he came to the bed, bent down, and hugged the girl. He gently kissed her soft lips, and only separated after a full minute. Chloe licked her lips and said coquettishly, "The time just now was too short. I think we should do it again. Stop fooling around. Hurry up and get up. We're going to Beata Island today to inspect the vegetation cover there. If it's good, we could try to develop animal husbandry. Otherwise, there's no way to guarantee the demand for meat by just raising pigs." With that, Andre used his right index finger and thumb to intimately pinch the girl's nose. Just as he was about to pull Chloe up, he suddenly heard a low and hoarse voice in his ear. "Come to the sewers." Immediately. Immediately. My dear, what's wrong with you? Chloe found that her fiancé's expression seemed a little strange and hurried over to ask nervously. Andre reluctantly squeezed out a smile and quickly shook his head. No, nothing. It seems that you'll have to go to Beata Island for me today. I just remembered that there's a very important matter that needs to be dealt with immediately. After saying this, he didn't even give Chloe a chance to ask and hurriedly rushed out of the room. In the blink of an eye, he disappeared without a trace through teleportation magic. Chapter 894. After a short few minutes, Andre squeezed through the gap of the teleportation spell and appeared in the northern part of the city's sewers. As soon as he stepped through the portal, he immediately felt an indescribable, terrifying power gathering in front of him. On the ground, on the walls, in the air, the burning phenomenon caused by the invasion of Hell's energy could be seen everywhere. There were also many unknown plants and small insects growing rapidly under the nourishment of the energy. He believed that if the situation continued, the surrounding sewers would be completely blocked in a few days, forming a new closed ecosystem. After seeing Andre appear, the half-elf mage bowed gracefully and greeted. "Good morning, my friend. I'm sorry to disturb you and your cute little fiancé, but there's no other way. The summoning ritual is coming to an end. Do you feel this incomparably powerful power? It's the real body of the Earl of Hell, Namuku, on the other side of the portal. Orlando, shut up. Concentrate on your task. I don't want to see any more accidents. Do you understand?" The Lich, standing in the dark corner, reprimanded his apprentice mercilessly. He did not show any mercy just because the other party was half a step into the legendary realm. "I'm sorry, teacher. You have to understand that the small mistake that happened a few days ago can't be blamed on me. It was the vampire hosting the ritual that had a problem. I don't know why, but he suddenly twitched all over and interrupted the ritual. If I hadn't secretly remedied it, I'm afraid it would have been delayed for more than half a month." The half-elf pretended to defend himself, and at the same time, he secretly winked at Andre with his left eye. As a smart person, Andre immediately realized that this must be the side effect of the potion that was still in the experimental stage a few days ago. Perhaps the neural circuit of the vampire was different from that of a normal person, or it could be that the effect of the potion was delayed in their body. In short, the effect that should have been immediate was delayed for a few days on the vampire. No wonder the summoning ritual that was originally planned to be completed in 3 days was delayed for a whole week. The Lich was obviously not the kind of person who would listen to explanations and excuses. The two cold lights in his eyes soared. Orlando immediately shut his mouth sensibly and began to silently guide the huge amount of energy into the portal built in the center of the ritual. As the ritual had reached its final stage, even those who didn't know magic could clearly feel that the space was being torn apart bit by bit. An unknown substance had broken the continuity of the space, and it was just one step away from connecting the two completely different worlds. As a transmigrator who was deeply influenced by materialistic education, Andre looked at the scene in front of him with awe. Because he was still too weak and ignorant, he could not interfere. He could not use the physics knowledge in his mind to explain what he was seeing. Sensing the strong thirst for knowledge in his eyes, the Lich nodded approvingly. Very good eyes. A strong thirst for knowledge is the key to finding the truth. If you weren't the owner of the Arcane Eye, I would definitely be willing to become your teacher and lead you into the Palace of Knowledge. Also, take off that ridiculous blindfold. You won't need it soon. As you wish. Andre bowed slightly and took off the captain's blindfold. The ring in his violet left pupil began to spin wildly, emitting a suffocating power. It was like a black hole that could never be filled, eager to devour everything around it. Even the air was no exception. What a perfect magical creation. No matter when I see it, I feel a throbbing from the bottom of my heart. As he spoke, the Lich reached out his hand obsessively, as if wanting to touch the Arcane Eye again. However, he withdrew his hand halfway and asked, "How do you feel? Have you heard any voices in your mind recently? Or have you had strange dreams?" Obviously, he hadn't forgotten that a finger bone had been devoured not long ago, so he decisively chose to give up. Andre recalled for a few seconds and quickly shook his head. No, I've been sleeping very well recently, and I haven't heard any strange voices. Is that so? Looks like you haven't absorbed enough energy. It doesn't matter. You'll soon see the true form of the arcane eye and its unparalleled power. Just as the lich finished speaking, a deafening sound suddenly came from the end of the sewer. Boom! Orange-red flames erupted from the center of the summoning ritual, quickly forming a strong shock wave and a heat wave that assaulted their faces. However, these fatal flames, shock waves, and heat waves were all 10 meters away, isolated by a force field invisible to the naked eye. Not even a spark could splash in. Looking at the large amount of rubbish that had been burned to black charcoal in front of him, the corners of Orlando's mouth curled up slightly, and he sighed in an ariat tone. Hee, as expected of a noble from hell. Just by squeezing your body into the material world, you can produce such powerful energy. Namuku, my old friend, I hope you won't be too angry. Before he could finish speaking, for some reason, a slight tremor suddenly came from the end of the sewer, as if a huge monster was walking. A mere second later, an angry roar resounded through the entire sewer, and even the residents on the surface could hear it clearly. Casimir Kiz, you idiot, lowly maggot, what's in your head? Is it all shit? You actually dared to summon my main body into the material world. Do you know what this means? I'm sorry, Great Count of Hell, the ruler of the War Fortress. Kinbel, the ruler of lies and conspiracies, the great devil born from the flames, Namuku. I don't know why this happened. Please give me some time. Casimir was clearly scared out of his wits. His entire body was trembling, and he couldn't even speak properly. After all, class was the foundation of all order in hell. As an agent of the devil, he would never be able to resist his master, and even his soul after death was no exception. Maggot, you still dare to quibble? I'll give you 1 minute. Find out the reason immediately. Otherwise, I'll crush all the bones in your body one by one. Namuku was obviously enraged to the extreme. He waved his strong arms and smashed the surrounding pipes into smithereens. In his eyes, the hard rocks were basically no different from a freshly baked cake. Chapter 895. His entire body was covered in crimson scales, and a pair of large bat-like wings extended from his back. Green venom constantly dripped from his mouth, stirring up clouds of smoke as it fell to the ground. His black claws were sharper than any known steel in this world, and his 2 evil red eyes could easily destroy a mortal's will. This was the current appearance of the Count of Hell, Namuku. He held a 3-meter-long, flaming greatsword in one hand, and wore something similar to a boxing glove on the other. Every time he waved it, a ghastly wail could be heard. Apart from that, a belt made from the skulls of various powerful creatures hung around this great devil's waist. Among them were the heads of his mortal enemies, as well as heavenly creatures that the devils loathed. Their expressions were distorted and vivid, and it was obvious that they were powerful and evil magical equipment. Obviously, in terms of species, he was a typical pit fiend. These creatures were at the top of the devil's complex evolutionary system, and they were the absolute nobles of Bator. They formed the most elite class of the devils, ruling over the other devils. Only the lords of this level had a higher status than them. Pit fiends were qualified lords and hereditary nobles, and at the same time, excellent ministers, generals, advisors, and schemers. Although their strength was terrifying, they rarely participated in battle. Unless there was a deviation in some important plan, they would always hide under the protection of their armies. But now, Namuku had actually been summoned to the material world along with his main body. There was neither a sturdy stronghold nor a disciplined devil army to protect him. It was like a man in armor had suddenly been stripped naked, and he was instantly filled with a sense of crisis. The fact that he hadn't torn Casimir to shreds was already a sign of restraint. What was even more troublesome was that the appearance of his main body in the material world meant that he could be completely and utterly killed, unlike a projection that could return to hell and be reborn even if he was killed. As a great devil who was like a fish in water when it came to schemes and plots, Nemuku could feel that this was no ordinary magical accident, but a plot against him. Just as he was using his clever brain to quickly filter out the possible enemies that could be involved, he suddenly heard a familiar voice by his ear. "Dear Nemuku, I haven't seen you for so many years, but you're still as cautious and suspicious as before. Isn't it good to come to the material world? You must know that many demon nobles would not hesitate to spend hundreds or even thousands of years to plan a conspiracy in order to open a door to the material world. Yet here you are, throwing a fit. My painstaking efforts have been in vain." After saying that, the half-elf great mage slowly walked out of the darkness. With a cynical smile on his face, the ring on his finger, the amulet on his neck, the long robe on his body, and the topaz on the top of the staff in his hand all released a brilliant magical radiance. With just a thought, he could immediately activate the offensive or defensive spells stored in them. Lightning Punisher, Orlando, did you plan all this? Nimwuku's nostrils flared with hot air as he questioned in a loud voice. However, if one were to observe carefully, they would discover that he was not truly angry. Instead, he was taking advantage of the time he spoke to divert his attention, causing all the muscles in his body to quickly tighten. The hand holding the flame greatsword lowered slightly, silently adjusting himself to battle mode. After all, mages, especially powerful mages, were publicly acknowledged as the most difficult enemy to deal with in the entire multiverse. Whether it was their strange arcane spells or their frightening brains, they were enough to pose a huge threat to their opponents. Of course, if the meeting place was changed to the war stronghold of hell, Camber, Nimwuku would not be so nervous. That was because there was an army of hundreds of thousands of demons protecting and escorting them. No matter how powerful Orlando was, he would not be able to get rid of such a large number of troops in one go. He would be able to drown them alive with sheer numbers. It must be known that demons were not weak mortals. Even the lowest lesser demons were equivalent to several rank 1 professional warriors, and their magic resistance was also quite strong. A fireball spell could kill a dozen humans, but it might not necessarily kill a lesser demon. Lightning Punisher? Ha ha! I didn't think that you would still remember my title from back then. What? Seeing an old friend? You don't plan on giving me a warm hug? The half-elf laughed heartily as he opened his arms, acting as if he wanted to hug a demon. Because the difference in size between the two was too great, they looked like a baby and a giant. But what was hard to believe was that the giant Nimwuku was actually afraid. He was shrinking back. He brandished his blazing greatsword and roared with a sinister expression. "Don't come near me. Scram. Otherwise, I'm going to attack." Orlando clutched his chest and deliberately put on a grief-stricken expression as he teased. "Oh, heavens, you actually refused to hug an old friend. This was really too heartbreaking. Do you know? In order to open the connection between the two worlds, I worked hard in the smelly sewers for more than a week. I couldn't eat or sleep every day just to be able to meet you." Without waiting for the half-elf to finish speaking, Nimwuku immediately interrupted impatiently. "Enough. Don't put on that disgusting appearance in front of me. I believe that you should be very clear about the serious consequences if we directly start a war here. So tell me, what are your intentions in summoning my main body to the material world? Tis TSK, you're still as impatient as before. Moreover, even if we start a war, so what? At most, we'll just be surrounded by the churches of the gods. At worst, I'll just hide in another plane for 100 or 200 years. On the other hand, you'll definitely be captured alive by the priests, knights, and paladins that flock here, and then sealed in some remote corner of the world. If you're lucky, you might be released by an ignorant adventurer after a few hundred years. When you return to hell, you'll immediately be surprised to find that your position has been replaced by another person. There might even be a humiliating demotion waiting for you. But if you're unlucky, you might have to spend your entire life sealed, until the sun is extinguished and the entire world is destroyed. When Orlando said these words, it could be said that he was full of emotion, not caring in the slightest about the demon's increasingly ugly expression and the ominous glint in his eyes. He was like a matador holding a red cloth, stimulating Nim Wuku's sensitive nerves to his heart's content. In just a few minutes, he successfully attracted all of his attention. Chapter 896. However, as a greater devil, Namuku was not to be trifled with. Having lived in a place filled with intrigue for so long, he had long since engraved the word caution into his soul. This was especially true in Bator, where those who were not careful enough would have long since been eliminated. How could he possibly become a pit fiend in the midst of an army of thousands of men and horses? He did not believe a single word of the half-elf's threat. His eyes constantly swept around, trying to find traps and ambushes hidden in the darkness. "Dear old friend, what are you looking for? Do you need my help?" Orlando teased, even though he already knew the answer. There was a good saying, the person who understood you the most was not your relative, friend, or lover, but your enemy. As an outstanding spellcaster, he had long since used all sorts of divination spells and investigative methods to study his opponent's character, habits, and style of conduct. He could even predict what the enemy would do or react in the next few seconds. For great wizards who always liked to plan before acting, battles were like acting out a script that had been prepared beforehand. Almost all the preparatory work had been completed before the battle began. They would rarely participate in a battle where the odds of victory were less than 70%, and they would not appear in front of the enemy without any preparations. This also meant that once they dared to stand out in the open, it meant that victory was within their grasp. Namuku hated the current passive situation, and even more so when he fell into a trap set up by the enemy. The reason he had not taken any countermeasures was mainly due to his nature as a devil. Although these monsters born of evil and order had sinister appearances and possessed strength countless times greater than that of mortals, they did not like to use violence. At the very least, they would not consider using violence until they had used up their normal methods of deception, threats, hints, and bribery. Of course, this might be a strategy of the devils. They wanted to distinguish themselves from their mortal enemies, the demons, and create a good reputation in the multiverse. This way, whether it was tricking more idiots into signing contracts of servitude or hiring mercenaries to become cannon fodder in a bloody battle, it would be relatively easier. After a few minutes of silence, Namuku decided to try to use negotiation to ease the conflict. Just as he opened his mouth wide to say a few good words, he suddenly felt that the half-elf's gaze was somewhat strange. It was as if the half-elf was not staring at him, but at a certain part of his head. As a demon with a keen sense for danger, he immediately looked up to see what was above his head. However, just as he raised his head that had the characteristics of a spider and a hound, Orlando immediately seized this once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to raise the staff in his hand and shoot out dozens of dazzling lightning bolts. At the same time, he shouted, "Mentor, do you intend to continue watching the show?" Namuka didn't expect that the other party would attack, just like that. Without much time to think, he immediately spread out the huge wings behind him, blocking in front of his chest. One had to know that the half-elf lightning punisher's nickname wasn't just for show. The lightning spells he used were exceptionally powerful, and there was even a record of him killing a Hezru with a single strike. He didn't want to be captured or sealed because of a moment of carelessness. Otherwise, he would definitely become the laughingstock of the entire netherworld. However, Namuku had apparently forgotten that although the wings could reduce the damage caused by the lightning, it also blocked his vision. When the lightning and the red scales collided and produced a dazzling light, a cloud of black smoke suddenly descended from the sky. At the center of the smoke was a gorgeous crown, unlike the goods that Andre had rushed to make. This crown far surpassed the former in terms of craftsmanship and the number of gems embedded in it, especially the fatal attraction it emitted at all times. Just a glance at it gave one the urge to snatch it and put it on their own head. Without any surprise, the crown accurately landed on Namuku's huge head. He didn't even have time to react before he heard the Lich's low and hoarse voice reverberating in the sewers. "Imprison. Bind. In the name of the supreme royalty. I order you to kneel." Following this sentence, the emerald at the top of the crown instantly released a dazzling brilliance. Namuku only felt an irresistible force acting on his body. No matter how he struggled or resisted, it was useless. After a short few seconds, his knees slowly lost support, and he knelt in front of the Lich with a plop. Dumbfounded, no one present dared to believe what they were seeing with their own eyes. This was especially so for the Devil's agent, Casimir, who felt like he was going crazy. Since when would a high and mighty devil kneel to someone else? Even if they met a Lord of Bator, the most they would do was bow in respect. More importantly, as a legendary pit fiend, Namuku seemed to have no ability to resist at all. He was easily toyed with in the palms of his opponent. Terrifying, trembling. Even the vampire Gistrupni couldn't help but want to escape. In his opinion, this Lich that had appeared out of thin air was 10 times more terrifying than his own father, Duke Calvin. Just the aura of terror surrounding his body was enough to destroy the will of a low-ranked professional, making them lose the courage to pick up a weapon for the rest of their lives. Namuku felt an unprecedented humiliation. He glared with 2 eyes full of rage and roared loudly. "Let me go. Immediately. Immediately. You're challenging the bottom line of all the devils in Bator." "Haha, challenging? No, little fellow. Challenging is under the premise that you can return to Bator alive. If you can't return alive, then it's as if this scene never happened. If I remember correctly, this content should be taught by the School of Politics after a mid-ranked devil evolved into a greater devil. Have you forgotten? Or did you secretly bribe the examiner during the exam?" The Lich was clearly very familiar with the order and laws of Bator, and even used the famous School of Politics to make a joke. After all, devils were not kind-hearted people. From the day they were born, scheming had become an instinct hidden in their souls. According to the statistics of Bator's Justice Bureau, the number of unlucky devils who died every year from various accidents exceeded 200,000. As for why these accidents had so many similarities, that was not within the scope of Bator's Justice Bureau's consideration. In their eyes, as long as there was no evidence, it was as if nothing had happened. Thus, of the 200,000 devils who died every year from accidents, how many had truly met with accidents, and how many had died from murder? No one was clear. Chapter 897. You want to kill me? Why? Is it because of the little conflict and unhappiness between me and Orlando? Namuku shouted in horror while desperately trying to break free from the shackles on his body. But unfortunately, this crown was obviously not an ordinary item. Even a great demon could not break free from the power it released, and he could not even stand up. Seeing his former enemy become a prisoner, with the half-elf's vengeful personality, how could he not take advantage of him? Before the Lich could give an answer, he came up to him and pretended to be kind and advised, "Dear old friend, don't struggle. The little thing you're wearing on your head is a divine artifact, Horror's Crown. I believe you should have heard of its name in hell. As a crown personally forged by the founder of the oldest kingdom known to mankind, Horror the Dragon Slayer, it has been blessed by many gods and worshipped by countless mortals. As long as mankind is the overlord of this continent, the crown will have a terrible power. We call it the supreme royalty. Just like the literal meaning, anyone who wears the crown will immediately gain indescribable charm. No matter if it's an ordinary person, a noble, or a professional, they will all fall into madness and be willing to do anything for the owner of the crown. Of course, as a divine artifact, it also has very large restrictions on its user. One of the harshest conditions is that this crown is only obedient to pure-blooded humans with the blood of Horror, the Dragon Slayer. Once an intelligent creature tries to usurp it, it will immediately be suppressed by all humans in the material world. If it's not strong enough, It will end up like you now, a pitiful slave. What's even more unfortunate is that my teacher happens to be one of the descendants of Horror, the Dragon Slayer. So he can now completely decide your life and death. He can even order you to commit suicide immediately, and you will do it without hesitation. Oh, by the way, I have to remind you one last thing. This time, I did not set you up for personal grudges, but for a greater goal. So don't even think about going back alive. Think of your last words now, or you won't have the chance later. Without a doubt, the reason why Orlando explained so patiently was not because he was really kind, but because he wanted to see the despair, frustration, and even tears of his former enemy. After all, mages were also humans, especially great mages like the half-elves who loved to enjoy life and didn't give up on their emotions. They especially liked to tease their former opponents after winning. Unfortunately, Namuku was a demon who was best at bewitching people, so he wasn't affected at all. He continued to speak to the Lich, powerful undead. Although I don't know what your goal is, a living count of hell will always be more useful than a dead one. I have an army of 300,000 demons under my command and a military fortress at the front line of the bloody war. Canbell, as long as you're willing to let me go, I can sign a strict magic contract. You can list your requirements as terms and conditions on it. If I dare to violate the agreement, you can go to the Infernal Justice Bureau and apply for enforcement. As long as it's a contract that's signed voluntarily, we demons have never tore apart a single one. Think about it. That's an army of 300,000 demons and an endless supply of hell specialties. My invincible army can even help you conquer a vast low magic plane. In a short few minutes, Namuku fully demonstrated to everyone present what it meant to be a demon's torrential eloquence, and what it meant to tempt mortals to fall into depravity. After all, every high-ranked demon had climbed up little by little. They've been sent to various corners of the universe to tempt mortals to sign contracts and sell their souls. Usually, only the few with the highest performance would be promoted, so their business quality naturally wouldn't be too bad. But it was a pity that the Lich wasn't swayed at all. He pointed to the three guys hiding in the corner and commanded, "Go capture them. No matter what happens next, don't let anyone know about it." "As you wish, my dear teacher." Orlando glanced at the demon with a pitying gaze, placing one hand on his chest and bowing. Namuku suddenly had a bad premonition. He immediately waved the huge flaming sword in his hand and roared, "No, no one can kill me. Go to hell." Lich. Under the effect of the terrifying power, the huge sword that was over 3 meters tall slashed down with lightning speed. Although he was forced to kneel on the ground, his arms weren't restricted in any way. If it wasn't for the fact that the Lich had great magic resistance, he would definitely have released another innate spell before the sneak attack. Boring little tricks. Seeing the huge sword descend from the sky, the Lich merely laughed coldly and muttered a command in a low voice. Instantly, a large white hand descended from the sky, sending Namuku flying more than 10 meters away with a bang. He then crashed into the wall with a bang, half of his body embedded in the stone. Casimir, who was closest to him, could even hear the sound of bones breaking at the moment of impact. He simply couldn't believe that a great demon would be thrown around like a rag doll by spells. Just as everyone was shocked by the scene in front of them, Orlando suddenly clapped his hands and laughed loudly. "Ha! My dear teacher, the way you cast the level 9 spell, Crushing Palm, is really an eye-opener for me. Tell me, how did you get rid of the complicated hand gestures and incantations and cast it with just a password? This is the realm of legends." Once you start learning the principles of legendary magic, you'll soon understand how to eliminate complicated hand gestures and shorten the time needed to chant incantations. After explaining, the Lich immediately turned around and waved at Andre, who was hiding in the darkness. "Come here, young man. Go and devour that demon. I can't wait to see the appearance of the awakened mystical eye." "Yes, master," Andre said as he walked out of the dark corner, his eyes full of excitement and anticipation. He had just witnessed with his own eyes how the two powerful spellcasters had toyed with the enemy in the palms of their hands. He had also seen the craftiness of the legendary pit fiends. Whether it was his vision or his heart, they had all been greatly strengthened. Moreover, he had a deeper understanding of magic and its application. In the future, he would definitely be able to walk a completely different path. Chapter 898. Without any hesitation, Andre arrived in front of Namuku, gazing at this enormous creature that was emitting a terrifying aura. However, he did not approach rashly. Instead, he buffed himself with a rank 4 spell, Stone Skin, before carefully taking a step forward. After all, pit fiends were still legendary creatures. Even if they were heavily injured, they would not lose the ability to retaliate. Moreover, the Lich had only said that he would devour this devil, not that he had already gained the ability to move. According to the nature of the legendary wizards of the ancient magic civilization, there must have been some sort of hidden test involved. If he could not even handle such a small problem, he would be a complete piece of trash and incompetent. Andre did not want to make a fool of himself at such a crucial moment. Reality proved that his caution was completely correct. The moment he stepped into Namuku's attack radius, the greater devil suddenly raised his head and opened his mouth to chant a strange syllable. The next second, asterisk boom, asterisk accompanied by a deafening sound. A powerful fireball exploded in front of Andre's chest. Scorching flames and heat waves completely engulfed him in a matter of seconds. However, Namuku, who had launched a sneak attack, still felt that it was not safe. He brandished his sharp claws and viciously clawed at the center of the explosion. As a pit fiend, he was immune to all fire damage, which was why he dared to use his innate ability, Fireball, at such a close distance without fear of being caught in the crossfire. However, he clearly did not know that Andre was the chosen of the Fire Elemental Prince, Isoldeezer. Otherwise, he would not have chosen to use fire magic. Just as his huge claws were about to touch the layer of stone on the surface of his skin, Namuku suddenly felt as if something had burned his scales that were immune to fire damage. Before he could react, a strange, bewitching deep blue flame suddenly erupted from the center of the flames. The source of this flame was Andre, who had just been hit by the fireball. He was now basically naked. Apart from the things related to magic, be it his clothes or pants, everything had been burnt to a crisp. His eyes were filled with annoyance. Although he had not suffered any real damage up until now, as a civilized person, it was embarrassing to be naked in front of so many eyes. Andre, who was showing signs of anger out of humiliation, did not say anything further and directly pounced forward, releasing the power of the arcane eye to his heart's content. Countless golden rings gushed out from his pupils, firmly locking onto Namuku's arm, pulling his huge body little by little into his eyes. Every time he digested a part of it, Andre would gain an objective amount of experience points. As a great devil, Namuku had seen countless bizarre and terrifying situations, but he had never seen anything that could compare to the scene before him. He could not suppress the fear in his heart, and he frantically, "No, no, no, mortal, stop. I order you to stop. Stop." Andre pursed his lips and shook his head with a cold smile. "I'm very sorry, but I can't control it now, let alone stop it. This is impossible. You, I beg you, stop it. I'm willing to offer my everything. Wealth, status, power, strength. I can give you everything." Watching his body being devoured bit by bit, Namuku completely let go of his last bit of restraint and began to kneel and beg the mortals he looked down on the most. There was no trace of the majesty that an aristocrat of hell should have. "I'm sorry, you can't give me what I want." Having said that, Andre no longer paid any attention to the devil's reaction, focusing on the large amount of information that appeared in his vision. Devoured the finger of a legendary creature, a pit fiend. Congratulations. You have gained 15,000 experience points. Devoured the palm of a legendary creature, a pit fiend. Congratulations. You have gained 23,000 experience points. Devoured the arm of a legendary creature, a pit fiend. Congratulations! You have gained 50,000 experience points. As the pit fiend was devoured and digested bit by bit, a sea of experience points surged. In the blink of an eye, he had gained more than 400,000, and this was only half of it. If he digested all of it, he would have gained at least 800,000 to 900,000. He sighed inwardly. Legendary creatures were truly legendary creatures. Andre began to allocate the experience points to his wizard profession. By the time Namuku was completely absorbed in his vision, he had already leveled up twice, going from level 10 to level 12 in one go. He had also gained an additional specialty point, and he chose to prepare spells. The effect of this specialty was to slightly alter the spell structure, making it harder to dispel the defensive spells cast on him. It was an indispensable part of magic duels. Once the 600,000 experience points were used up, a large amount of mana surged into his body, transforming every cell name. Andre Blanchefleur, descendant of a fire elemental alignment. Neutral attributes: strength, 7 plus 5 agility, 17 vitality, 10 plus 5 intelligence, 23 perception, 12 charm, 9 plus 3 profession. Level 12 wizard/level 3 rogue swordsman experience required to level up: 809000/1609000 special profession. Acer's chosen, level 1. Health points: 107 healthy experience points, 263,250. Unallocated, memorizable arcane spells. Level 0 for level 1. 6 level 2. 6 level 3. 5 plus 1. Effective Wizard's Badge. Level 4. For plus 1. Effective Wizard's Badge. Level 5. For level 6. 3 Magic Pet Information Name. Small Eyes Race. Small Eyes. Magic Creature. Alignment. Neutral Evil Profession. Magic Pet. Level 12. This creature's level increases as the Master's Wizard level increases. Health points: 43. Healthy. Special abilities: Cold Ray, 24 shots per day. Damage Ray, 24 shots per day. Heat Ray, 2 shots per day. Looking at the current attributes panel of himself and his magic pet, Andre finally breathed a sigh of relief. In this world, a level 12 wizard could be regarded as an out-and-out high-end power. In particular, the appearance of level 6 spell slots greatly increased the choice of tactics. Among them, many defensive spells such as Anti-Magic Field, Advanced Dispel Magic, Spell Nullification Barrier, and so on, could play a decisive role in a magic duel. As for the magic pet that had not been summoned for a long time, Small Eyes had also evolved to a certain extent. It had mastered a new ability of Fire Rays. A total of 50 energy rays a day allowed it to develop steadily in the direction of a mobile battery. Perhaps it would not be long before the magic pet alone could wipe out a well-equipped mercenary. Chapter 899. Master, Just as Andre finished leveling up and was about to say something to the Lich, he suddenly felt his heart twitch violently. Thump, 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 thump. As his heart twitched more and more frequently, he felt a force slowly rising from his heart and surging towards his left eye. The arcane eye, which had been obediently staying in his eye socket, seemed to be attracted by some kind of force and slowly began to break free from the optic nerve connected to his brain, attempting to become independent from his body. What was even more surprising was that this process did not cause any pain at all, nor did it cause a drop of blood. After a short few minutes, this eyeball, which was flickering with violet light, finally managed to break free from its eye socket and floated alone in the air. The ring in the pupil spun rapidly, releasing a blinding light like the stars in the night sky. Everyone present could feel the terrifying magical energy gathering rapidly with the eyeball as the center. In terms of strength, it far surpassed the teleportation channel that connected the two worlds not long ago. He. The arcane eye is finally awakening. The entire world will change because of this. Staring at the eyeball in the center of the energy storm, the Lich let out a hair-raising whisper. He then immediately raised his hand and chanted a spell in a low voice, completing a shielding spell that directly isolated the northern sewer from the material world. Although there was no longer a shrine on the island, he still decided not to let any traces of it leak out for safety's sake. The terrifying magical storm destroyed everything in its surroundings. To be precise, it disintegrated all matter into countless particles that could not be seen with the naked eye. It was even more terrifying than the level 6 spell, Disintegrate. Even the knowledgeable half-elf Great Wizard Orlando could not help but widen his eyes, continuously casting prophecy spells to find out what kind of power was so terrifying. Unfortunately, all his efforts were destined to be in vain. After failing to obtain any clues after several attempts, he shook his head dejectedly and closed his eyes to silently feel the changes in the magical energy in the air. He planned to remember this feeling first, and then slowly analyze and research it to find out the mystery behind it when he became a true legendary mage. After more than 10 minutes, the storm that disintegrated everything slowly came to a stop. All the energy in the space was absorbed by the arcane eye and finally transformed into the energy it needed. When the blinding light reached a certain intensity, it suddenly trembled. In the next second, a metallic voice sounded in Andre's mind. Energy storage has exceeded 5%. The minimum standard has been reached. The subconscious is awakening. 10, 9, 8, 7, 3, 2, 1. The Eye of Future, Amos, has been awakened. Consciousness correction commencing. Storing data confirmed. Greetings, esteemed master. Eye of Future Amos is at your disposal. As the last word left his mouth, the eyeball floating in the air suddenly retracted the dazzling light emitted from its pupil. It returned to the empty eye socket and connected with the optic nerve. The whole process took no more than 10 seconds. Then, Andre felt that something had drilled into his brain and started to list, organize, and back up all the knowledge and thoughts in his head, forming a library-like system. With just a thought, he could retrieve the deepest memories immediately. In order to confirm his guess, he directly asked through his consciousness, Amos, are you my left eye? Yes, master. I am your left eye, and I was once the tattoo on the back of your hand. Do you have any orders for me? The metallic voice immediately responded. Even though it spoke logically, there was no emotion in it. It was as cold as a machine. Andre hesitated for a moment before finally asking a question that had been bothering him for a long time. Yes, I want to know. You seem to have hinted in the dream that I was born from your womb. Can you explain what that means? Without a doubt, this was a very sensitive and fatal question. Even the self-proclaimed Eye of Future Amos fell into a short silence. Fortunately, it seemed that it could not disobey its master's will. It quickly replied, just like the literal meaning, when you were still a baby in your mother's womb and did not have any consciousness, I secretly used the purest magical energy to modify your body and brain so that the newborn soul could better adapt to supernatural powers. Why did you do that? Andre frowned and continued asking. Obviously, he was quite repulsed by this kind of thing. After all, no one would be willing to be a lab rat in a scientific experiment, even if the experiment had great benefits for them. According to the predetermined procedure, after selecting a target, I had to perform magical modification to ensure that the master has superior intelligence and magic affinity. More importantly, if you don't have magic, then I can't bring your soul back to the material world. Amos had no intention of hiding the reason for the modification and gave the answer generously. Furthermore, it seemed that it could not understand the anger shown by its master. Andre keenly noticed this and quickly probed. You mentioned the predetermined procedure just now. Can you tell me what it includes? Also, why did you choose me out of so many people? What's so special about me? The predetermined procedure includes 4 points. First, search for traces of the existence of intelligent life. Second, Search for the most developed races and regions in the surrounding area first and collect all useful knowledge. Third, perform magical modification after selecting a target, and then hide in the dark to ensure that they can grow up healthily and create a perfect personality. Lastly, when the time is ripe, bring the target back to the material world and fulfill the scene described in the Great Prophecy. The reason why I chose you is very simple. The country you were born in was implementing a type of education that was very much in line with the views of mages, materialistic education, compared to those countries that were filled with religious fanaticism and false beliefs. Such an environment was undoubtedly easier to cultivate a calm, fearless, and rational person. In order to ensure that all of this would not go wrong due to various unexpected factors, I even adjusted your hormone secretion so that you would be free of the restlessness of puberty. However, since returning to the material world, I've exhausted all of my energy and had to temporarily fall into a deep sleep. There's no way I can help you control your hormones. Saying this, Amos' tone revealed self-blame and regret, as if he had made a huge mistake. Chapter 900. No, there's no need. Thank you. I don't need you to help me control the secretion of any hormones. You're not allowed to interfere with my body without my orders in the future. Do you understand? Andre reprimanded with an ashen face. He finally understood why he was never like other boys when he was in school. He never had strong physiological urges towards a female classmate, nor did he actively pursue anyone. It was all because of this fellow. Control the secretion of hormones in the body. What was the difference between this and mental castration? What was worse was that this castration was carried out without him knowing. Seeing that its owner was angry again, Amos immediately replied with its metallic voice, "Yes, I understand. It's been recorded. I won't interfere with your body in any way. But I'm curious. Why did you make such a decision? Is it not good to eliminate all unstable factors?" Andre shook his head without hesitation. No, not good at all. You have to understand that humans are humans because they have impulses and desires that are difficult to suppress. These impulses and desires will eventually transform into motivation to move forward. Without desires and impulses, humans will become calm and indifferent. They will eventually lose their thirst for knowledge and the spirit to explore. Moreover, the secretion of hormones is restricted. This means that metabolism, development, reproduction, sex, and other aspects will be affected. It will also create many unpredictable problems. I don't want to find out that my body is in trouble one day. I'm very sorry. I can't understand this. Amos's voice was filled with doubt and incomprehension. Can't understand? What can't you understand? Is it related to the secretion of hormones or human nature? Andre quickly asked. In fact, through the continuous questioning, he could basically confirm the flaw of the Eye of Future. He just needed to confirm it one last time. Amos fell into a momentary hesitation, as if it was considering something. After a full minute, it said, "It's human nature and emotions. Because they don't have logic, they're always in chaos. No matter how precise the analysis is, there's no guarantee that there won't be any mistakes. Why don't you abandon them and stand from a purely rational point of view? I see. You're just a consciousness that can think independently. You're not alive. Am I right?" Andre finally figured out what the voice that had been talking to him was. You're right. I'm not a living being. I'm just a consciousness with the ability to analyze and think logically. The one who's really good at dealing with emotions and humanity is the Eye of the Past, Mogadishu. When the two of us fuse together, a unique life will be born. Amos straightforwardly admitted his flaw. He even provided the other half of the Arcane Eye's information. Although it had recorded a lot of knowledge, culture, technology, philosophy, and ideas on Earth, it was just a record. It did not have the ability to analyze and understand. In fact, creating life was no longer a difficult skill for legendary mages. Many great mages could do it. The only thing that Andre didn't understand was that Great Prophet Emmanuel had created a complete life, but for some reason, he had split it into two. Could it be that he was afraid that the arcane eye would develop its own will and break free from the preset program? Or could it be that the two eyes were actually some kind of special key that could open the secret storehouse of the ancient magical civilization that stored knowledge and wealth? So it was safer to store them separately? After all, Andre still had that sentence imprinted on his hand. The eye of the future has awakened. When it fuses with the eye of the past, the treasury of truth will be opened. In short, there were too many mysteries surrounding him. He couldn't find any clues in a short time. Just as he was about to ask Amos about the ability of the left eye, he suddenly realized that the Lich was standing less than a meter away from him. The horrifying undead took out a device that looked like a magnifying glass and carefully observed his left eye that had returned to normal. Soon, he nodded in satisfaction. Not bad. It seems that the consciousness that was in hibernation has been awakened, and it has hidden itself perfectly. Now, even if a god were to stand in front of you, he would not notice its existence. Master, please allow me to thank you for your help. Andre placed one hand on his chest and bowed slightly. You're welcome. How do you feel? Do you have any symptoms of dizziness or nausea? The Lich asked casually as he continued to observe. Andre lowered his head and glanced at his naked body. He smiled bitterly and shook his head. No, it's nothing. Other than feeling a little embarrassed to be naked, everything else is normal. Perhaps for the natives of Orire, a man or a boy naked was nothing at all. But for people from a highly developed world, it was simply a nightmare. He would rather take a sword than be naked like this. Ha ha! Relax, young man. Such a small matter isn't worth mentioning. Later, let Orlando give you a robe that is immune to fire damage. Now, since you have the ability to protect yourself, I'll tell you some secrets and things to take note of. With that, the Lich waved his finger and gently stirred the air. Instantly, the surrounding environment changed from a dilapidated sewer to an underground palace that burned with eternal flames. A large number of stone sculptures that were more than 5 meters tall stood on both sides of the hall. The arches above their heads were inlaid with countless diamonds. At a glance, it looked like a sky full of stars. It was simply luxurious to the extreme. Andre could hardly imagine how much money it would cost to build such a large ceiling, and there seemed to be some kind of magic on it. All the diamonds were moving according to a certain pattern. It was no different from the real night sky. In addition to the above, there was a table that was 50 meters long in the middle of the hall. It was densely packed with all kinds of exquisite food and drinks. Some of the ingredients were even ingredients that he had never seen before. Driven by his foodie instinct and strong curiosity, Andre quickly walked to the table and grabbed a small piece of unknown meat and put it into his mouth. After only a second, his taste buds felt a kind of extreme freshness. It was neither like fish nor some kind of land animal. Following that, he tasted a few other dishes and fruits. In the end, he found that almost all of them were real and not some kind of illusion. In other words, under the premise that no one was aware, the Lich used a group teleportation spell to transfer everyone here. There was neither chanting nor casting a spell. Such a method was a little shocking. Chapter 901. However, the half-elf Orlando seemed to be used to it. He ignored the 3 panicking captives behind him and stuffed a bunch of grapes into his mouth. As he ate, he said in a half-joking tone, "My dear mentor, although I know you don't need to eat, drink, or rest, please consider us living people. Don't always use illusions to fool your guests, even though the illusions created by magic are more delicious than real food." Illusions? Andre raised his eyebrows in surprise. He quickly put a cherry into his mouth and chewed carefully before swallowing it slowly. The taste, the touch, the smell, and even the feeling of fullness were all there. He couldn't feel the slightest bit of falsehood. My friend, you don't have to try anymore. You can tell the difference between the illusions and the real thing just by looking at the physiological structure of the human body. This is because they don't trick the 5 senses in the ordinary sense, and they work directly on your brain. It can be said that apart from not being able to absorb the nutrients the body needs, these illusions are no different from the real thing. We're not that hungry anyway, so let's just treat it as a form of entertainment for the time being. Having said that, Orlando didn't care about the elegant image he usually maintained. He sat down on a comfortable chair and opened his mouth to gorge himself on the food. He didn't look like a person with elven blood at all. Andre looked at the delicious food on the table and sighed slightly. He muttered to himself, "Is this the pinnacle of illusions? It seems like there isn't a single useless person in the 8 major magic schools. I wonder how powerful the phantom assassin who claims to be able to extract fear from the target's subconscious and scare them to death is." The Lich obviously didn't care about these trivial matters. He walked directly to the chair built with white bones at the end of the long table and tapped on the armrest lightly. He quickly said, "Before we start the formal conversation, I think I need to introduce myself. My name is Absalom Blackburn, so people call me the Undead King." The Undead King, Absalom Blackburn, you're the creator of necromancy magic, the first human mage in history to transform himself into a lich? Andre exclaimed. He couldn't be blamed for making a fuss over nothing. It was just that the name of the Undead King was far too famous. Even if the gods had been secretly suppressing and even erasing all traces of the existence of the ancient magic civilization, there were still countless spellcasters who worshipped this master who invented the method of transforming living creatures into undead. To a certain extent, his existence was no longer as simple as a legendary mage, but a symbol of the great historical process, a symbol of the pinnacle of human magic. Andre even believed that as long as the Undead King stood out and announced that he wanted to revive the glory of the ancient magic civilization, half of the world's mages would instantly gather to respond to his call, even if they had to become enemies with the gods. As if he had heard a funny joke, Absalom laughed in his deep and hoarse voice. "Ha ha 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 ha! The creator of necromancy? Is that how mages describe me now? How interesting. Unfortunately, I'm afraid the truth will disappoint you. Necromancy magic had already formed a system when the creator's race was active. I just collected and organized them, and then made some slight modifications. In addition, the method of transforming into a lich also came from the research of the creator's race. As early as 30,000 years ago, there were already many wizards who could transform themselves into lich forms. When I was young, I was fortunate enough to witness one of them, and under his guidance, I started my own path of magic. So, you don't have to think of me as a great person, and you don't have to fear my reputation. As the owner of the Arcane Eye, and the influential revolutionary in the Great Prophecy, your future achievements will definitely be greater than mine. There's no need to doubt this. Remember, no matter what happens, you must maintain a fearless heart, because once you get used to fearing power that's stronger than you, you'll lose the courage to explore the truth." Andre nodded thoughtfully. "You're right. Habit is a very scary thing, and it can even change a person's fate. In my hometown, there's a famous saying, 'Failure is the mother of success.' It means that on the road to success, there are bound to be many failures. But the problem is that many sad losers like to comfort themselves with this saying. They don't know that once failure becomes a habit, they'll never be able to succeed in their lifetime. Don't worry, although I revere the gods, I'm not afraid of them because what I revere is power itself, and not those ridiculous doctrines. In my opinion, no matter if it's a god or a religion, they should first be tolerant. Not only can they bring comfort to people's hearts, but they should also maintain the stability of the whole civilization. But look at what the gods of this world have done. They incite wars and conspiracies for their own selfish interests. Not to mention crazy gods like the goddess of the ocean who rely on fear to gain the respect of mortals, and Father Nature who forcibly restricts the development of human civilization in order to protect the forest. As gods, their ideas are so extreme, and they don't care about the feelings of mortals. I really don't understand why such gods haven't been abandoned. When saying these words, Andre did not hide his disgust or even hatred for some gods. Although so far, he had not directly clashed with any of the gods' churches, this was only temporary. With the expansion of his forces, sooner or later, he would touch the sensitive nerves of some of the gods' churches, especially the goddess of ocean and Father Nature. The former set off monstrous waves to destroy ships every few days, greatly limiting the speed of human development of the sea. The latter was an out-and-out extreme environmental protection. Every year, a large number of lumberjacks would be expelled or killed by his believers. Even the expansion of some aristocrats' territory and farmland would be regarded as a blasphemy against nature. Oh, I like your attitude towards the gods. You should know that the culprits of the destruction of the magic civilization included Father Nature and the goddess of the ocean. One of them thinks that we have destroyed the balance of nature, and the other thinks that the floating city and the floating ship have violated the interests of the sea. If you have a conflict with their churches in the future, please be sure to inform me. I don't mind giving you a little help. As he said this, the two cold lights in the Lich's eyes soared, and his tone was full of hatred towards the two gods. Chapter 902. In fact, the enmity between the ancient magic civilization and the gods had long been irreconcilable with the earth-shattering war. One of them was the mortals who were eager to uncover the secrets of the universe and pursue the supreme truth. The other was the gods who hoped to use faith to influence the mortals. They hoped to make more mortals agree with their ideas and obey their will. Then, they would completely establish a kingdom that ruled the spiritual and spiritual world. Anyone who dared to pry into the secrets of faith would be treated as a great enemy. Whether it was ideology or behavior, it was decided that the legendary sorcerers and the gods were destined to be enemies. Unless one of them was defeated and surrendered, there would never be an end to it. It was like the Renaissance on Earth, when many countries in Europe challenged the authority of the Roman Catholic Church. Only war, death, and destruction could make everything return to peace. With the rapid improvement of his own power, André had begun to prepare to join this protracted war. Although he had not made clear which side he was on, because of the long-term education of materialism, it was inevitable that he would lean toward the sorcerers. After all, from the current situation, the undead king, who represented the ancient magic civilization, had made a big bet. Whether from the perspective of feelings or interests, André had to give a satisfactory return. Thinking of this, he immediately smiled, put one hand on his chest, and bowed deeply. Of course, master, you should know best that I have never been soft-hearted when dealing with my enemies. The undead king nodded with satisfaction. Very good. Let's stop talking about the gods. I believe you will make the right choice when the time comes. Now, I will tell you some things to pay attention to. It's good to be alert. Don't treat it as child's play, because it's related to your safety. I understand. I'm very happy to listen to your wise guidance. André slightly lowered his head to show his humility. He was very clear that he did not know enough about this world. It was impossible for him to know the secrets that had been deliberately hidden by the falsified history, poems, and adventure stories. Now, a lich who had lived for thousands of years suddenly said that he would reveal some of them. He was more than happy. How could he ignore it? After all, Orier was not the earth. No matter how powerful a person was, he or she would turn into a pile of soil after 100 years. There were too many immortal monsters here, such as dormant dragons, sealed demons, or devils, slumbering undead, and so on. Who knew when he would be unlucky enough to meet one? It was better to know more about them so that he could be mentally prepared. At least, he would not be too late to escape. Absalom did not care about André's attitude. He held his chin with his bony palm for a few seconds and quickly said, "Now, the undead eye. First of all, with the awakening of the arcane eye, you now have the ability to convert all things into your own power. This also means that you can rapidly increase your mage level through mass slaughter and devouring. However, I don't recommend you do that. The reason was simple. In the process of devouring the body and soul, it was very difficult to avoid the prying eyes of the gods. After all, every intelligent creature with faith would pray to their guardian before they died. So, once you displayed the power of the arcane eye, you would immediately enter the sight of the gods. Similarly, otherworldly creatures such as demons and devils can't do it either. They usually appear in the material world in the form of projections. Once their physical bodies die, their souls will instantly return to their home world to be reborn. In this way, the secret of you being the owner of the Arcane will still be known by outsiders. With the Lich's analysis, Andre immediately realized that he was in a bad situation. He subconsciously furrowed his brows and asked, "According to what you've said, wouldn't I be completely unable to unleash the power of my left eye and have my hands and feet tied?" The undead king sneered and asked, what else do you think? The greatest use of the undead eye is not to let you kill like a barbarian, but to increase the speed of learning and research. You are now a level 12 sorcerer. You can deal with most dangers in the current situation where magic is declining. The next goal is not to raise the level of your sorcerer, but to combine the knowledge in your head with magic and walk a path that belongs to you. Of course, if you encounter a situation similar to today, I will not stop you from devouring the other party. In short, you have to learn to hide yourself and control the yearning for power in your heart. Never lose your way. All right, you have a point. I will be careful in the future. Please continue. Andre shrugged helplessly. Although he was a little depressed that he could not fully use the undead eye, it was not too difficult to accept that he had another powerful trump card. Anyway, before he awakened, he had relied on his wisdom to survive the most difficult years when he had just transmigrated. Absalom glanced at Andre playfully and continued, "Secondly, there are some places on the continent you'd better not go. They include the Johnston Forest in the center of the continent, the endless Amuta Wilderness in the east, the giant sea far away from the continent, the Supreme Glacier in the north, and so on. As for why, you'd better not ask because it's not time yet. You only need to know that these places are very dangerous even for Orlando. I will give you a detailed list later. Lastly, and most importantly, do not casually spread the knowledge you brought from another world. They are very dangerous, more dangerous than you can imagine, especially the computer you mentioned to me not long ago. The Parliament has already conducted the first round of experiments, and as a result, created an uncontrollable monster. It almost succeeded in killing 2 legendary mages. Fortunately, these 2 mages have already transformed themselves into liches and will be able to be reborn in a few days. What? You've tried using the mind flayers? Andre's eyes widened, and he almost had a heart attack from the shock. Every mind flayers was protected by hundreds and thousands of mind flayers, and these mind flayers also controlled a large number of slaves. To attack their cities and capture the mind flayers was an impossible task for most mages. Even if a legendary mage were to personally take action, it would not be so fast. At the mention of things related to magic research, the undead king immediately became interested and hurriedly replied, "That's right. Of course we've tried, and we've obtained very valuable data. You're right. The mind flayers do indeed have unparalleled analysis and storage abilities. The only problem is how to destroy or replace their original consciousness without causing any damage." You're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.